Welcome, my friends. How are you tonight? I hope you're doing well. Tonight's stories come from isolated trails, abandoned campsites, and the darkest corners of America's wilderness. Before we begin, let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on this video. If you enjoy scary stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. The ancient ones spoke of it in whispers around crackling fires. The Dine called it Yeitso, the big giant. The Apache named it Gendei, the big man. I knew it only as a childhood tale until the day I came face to face with the truth hidden in the shadow of Broken Horn Mesa. My journey began 3 months ago when I accepted the ranger position at Segi Canyon Wilderness Area. Financial necessity drove me there more than passion. After my father's medical bills depleted my savings and the gallery where I sold my pottery closed down, I needed steady work. Park Service paid decently and offered housing. A modest cabin nestled among ponderosa pines with views of red rock formations that changed color with the light. Kayatsanajini, I'd said, extending my hand to Ranger Wilson during orientation. It means dark cottonwood in Navajo. My grandmother chose it. I didn't mention that grandmother had warned me against taking this particular post. That land has old spirits, she'd said, her weathered hands wrapping sage into a small bundle for protection. Not all welcome human footsteps. I had nodded respectfully but dismissed her concerns. I needed this job. The cabin itself was nothing special. 1 bedroom, a small kitchenette, bathroom with temperamental plumbing. But the land around it spoke to something deep within me. Each morning, I'd drink coffee on the porch, watching golden light spill across ancient formations while jays called from the branches above. These quiet moments reminded me why I'd studied environmental science before life's complications pulled me away. My duties were straightforward: maintain trails, assist visitors, monitor wildlife, and patrol the restricted cave systems. The last part made up only a small portion of my responsibilities, but it would soon consume my entire existence. It began on a Tuesday patrol. Spring had arrived early, bringing desert wildflowers and the season's first tourists. I was checking the lower section of Eagle Trail when I noticed fresh footprints leading toward the restricted cave entrance. This wasn't unusual. Despite clear signage, tourists regularly ignored boundaries. I followed the tracks to Whispering Cave's entrance, a narrow vertical crack in the red sandstone that widened into a complex system below. The footprints disappeared inside, accompanied by scuff marks, suggesting someone had removed the security chain. "Hello? Park Ranger? This area is restricted," I called, my voice echoing into darkness. No response. I radioed dispatch. "Kaya here. Got possible trespassers at Whispering Cave. Going to check it out." "Copy that," came the crackled response. "Backup's 40 minutes out if you need it. Should be routine." "I'll keep you posted," I replied, clicking on my headlamp. The stone walls narrowed as I descended, cool air rising from below. My Navajo grandfather would have prepared with prayer before entering such places. I silently chided myself for forgetting the small pouch of protective herbs grandmother had given me. 30 feet in, the passage opened to a chamber where ancient peoples had once painted faded images on walls, handprints, spiraling patterns, and stick figures with elongated heads. I'd been here many times before during official surveys. The footprints continued deeper, where tourists rarely ventured. "Hello?" I called again, my voice strange against the stone. Something clattered in the darkness beyond. Then silence. When I reached the sound's origin, my light revealed a dropped water bottle, still rolling slightly. Whoever had come this way was moving quickly now. The cave system branched here. Safety protocol dictated I should wait for backup, but that could mean a lost tourist wandering deeper into dangerous territory. I hesitated, then followed the fresher marks leading left. The passage narrowed again, forcing me to duck. The air changed, damper, heavier with an unfamiliar musk. I'd navigated these caves many times, but something felt different now. Wrong. At the next chamber, my light caught movement against the far wall. A tall shadow retreated around a corner. "Stop! Park Service! I'm here to help!" I called. No response but a sound like heavy breathing. I rounded the corner and froze. There, pressed against the stone wall, was a set of handprints, not ancient paintings, but fresh impressions in the clay-like sediment. Each print was nearly twice the size of my own hand. Those weren't human tracks I'd been following. Above me, something moved in the darkness beyond my light's reach. A heavy shuffling, followed by what sounded like wood knocking against stone. Then a smell hit me. Musty, wild, primal. I backed away slowly, remembering the stories grandmother told by firelight, tales I'd dismissed as myths for tourists. The cave suddenly felt like it was breathing around me, ancient and aware. When the low growl came from the darkness ahead, I finally understood grandmother's warnings. I wasn't the hunter here. I was the prey. The growl echoed through the chamber, vibrating in my chest like distant thunder. Training kicked in. I maintained distance, kept my movements slow, and spoke in a calm, low voice. "I mean no harm," I said, addressing the darkness as though communicating with a mountain lion or bear, standard protocol for wildlife encounters. But this was different. The presence watching me from the shadows felt intelligent, calculating. I backed toward the entrance, careful not to turn my back. My headlamp caught a glimpse of movement, a massive shape shifting in the darkness, taller than any bear, covered in what appeared to be dark hair or fur. The smell intensified. Musky, earthy, like wet vegetation and something animal yet not entirely unfamiliar. I'd grown up tracking with my uncle, learning to identify wildlife by scent. This was unlike anything I'd encountered, yet somehow recognizable, almost human-adjacent. My radio crackled. "Kaya? Status update?" Over. The sudden noise startled whatever watched me. A deep, throaty vocalization, not quite a growl, not quite speech, erupted from the darkness. Something heavy slammed against stone, and rocks clattered down from above. I ran. The narrow passages that had seemed merely confining on the way in now felt like a trap. My light bounced wildly as I scrambled through tight turns, scraping my shoulders against rough stone. Behind me came sounds of pursuit, heavy footfalls, labored breathing, and the crack of disturbed rocks. I emerged gasping into the spring sunlight, not stopping until I reached my parked utility vehicle. Only then did I radio dispatch. "Potential dangerous wildlife encounter in Whispering Cave," I reported, my voice steadier than I felt. "Unknown species. Large, bipedal." "Bipedal?" The dispatcher sounded confused. "Like a person?" "No," I said after a pause. "Not a person. I didn't file an official report that day. What would I write? That I'd encountered the monster from my grandmother's stories? Instead, I logged it as a potential unauthorized access requiring further investigation. When my supervisor asked, I mentioned concerns about structural instability in the cave rather than what I'd actually seen. That night in my cabin, I couldn't shake the experience. The windows seemed too thin, the locks inadequate. I kept hearing sounds outside, branches scraping against the roof, footsteps on the porch that disappeared when I checked. Sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of being pursued through endless cave passages by something just beyond the reach of light. In the dream, I heard my grandmother singing a protective chant, her voice distant as though calling across a vast canyon. I woke before dawn, my sheets damp with sweat. On my bedside table sat a small clay jar of protective herbs and my grandmother's turquoise pendant, items I'd brought but hadn't unpacked yet. I reached for them now, suddenly desperate for their connection to home. As dawn broke, I made coffee and tried to rationalize yesterday's experience. Cave acoustics playing tricks. A large predator, perhaps a black bear with mange. Stress and poor lighting creating illusions. Each explanation seemed reasonable in daylight, yet none addressed the handprints or the intelligence I'd sensed watching me. I called my grandmother. "You've seen it," she said immediately. Not a question, but a statement. "I don't know what I saw," I replied. "The Daine have always known of the ones who walk between worlds," she said. "They lived here before us, and they remain in the secret places. Most hide from humans now, but some grow bold when we enter their territory." I wanted to dismiss her words as superstition, but the memory of those massive handprints remained too vivid. What should I do? Leave an offering, show respect, mark your boundaries with cedar smoke, and most importantly, stop trying to follow it. I spent that day patrolling the more frequented trails, staying in sunlit areas while formulating what to tell my supervisor. By afternoon, I'd convinced myself to request a formal investigation of the cave system for unusual wildlife activity. But as I approached the ranger station, a commotion drew my attention. A search and rescue operation was assembling. 2 hikers had failed to return from their permitted overnight trek near Broken Horn Mesa. "Kaya, good timing," my supervisor called. "Take Section 3, the Eastern Trail and Ridgeline. They were last seen heading that direction yesterday afternoon." "Any sign of them?" I asked, accepting the search parameters on my GPS. "Just a campsite. Looks like they left in a hurry. Equipment still there, but no hikers." He hesitated. "Strange thing is, the guide at the lookout post reported unusual sounds last night. Wood knocking and what he described as whooping calls from the direction of their camp." My skin prickled. Wood knocking. Like the sound I'd heard in the cave. "I'll take my section," I said, checking my pack and radio. As I headed toward my assigned search area, a nagging certainty grew. Whatever I'd encountered underground yesterday had surfaced, and now 2 people were missing because of it. The Eastern Ridgeline Trail wound through ponderosa stands and across red rock formations. Spring wildflowers dotted the landscape, contrasting against the stark beauty of the desert. Under different circumstances, I would have appreciated the scenery. Today, every shadow among the trees, every movement in my peripheral vision, set my nerves on edge. I reached the abandoned campsite by mid-afternoon. The scene was disturbing. A tent still standing but ripped open from one side, sleeping bags laid out, cooking equipment scattered. No blood, but clear signs of a struggle. Large, unusual footprints surrounded the area, similar to what I'd followed in the cave, but more defined in the soft earth. And there was something else. Arranged carefully on a flat rock at the edge of the campsite was a small pile of piñon nuts, turquoise fragments, and dried herbs. An offering, positioned like an altar. I recognized the items. They matched exactly what my grandmother had instructed me to leave as a sign of respect. Someone else knew what walked these woods, and they'd been trying to appease it. The abandoned campsite told a story I didn't want to read. I photographed everything: the torn tent, the scattered gear, the strange footprints. Most disturbing were the drag marks leading from the sleeping area toward the densely forested section of the mesa. 2 sets of heel impressions, as if both hikers had been pulled away simultaneously. Something caught my eye near the offering rock. A small leather-bound journal. I flipped through it, finding detailed notes and sketches. The missing male hiker, Jason Blackwood, was apparently a cryptozoology enthusiast. His entries described a methodical search for what he called the Arizona wildmen. Day 3 made contact. Wood knocking successful. Received 2 responses. Melissa skeptical but recorded audio. Placing offering tonight per local indigenous accounts. Will attempt closer approach tomorrow. The final entry sent ice through my veins. Something outside the tent. Massive. Standing just at edge of firelight. Melissa thinks bare but wrong silhouette. At least 7 feet. Bipedal. Making low vocalizations. Almost sounds like attempted speech. Getting recording device. The entry ended abruptly, the pen trailing off the page. I radioed the coordinates and findings to base camp, carefully editing my theory about what happened. Signs of large predator, I reported. Possible bear. Continuing to follow drag marks. Negative, Ranger seen a genie, came the immediate response. Wait for backup. ETA 20 minutes. I acknowledged but had no intention of waiting. The drag marks were fresh, less than 12 hours old. If the hikers were still alive, every minute mattered. Following the trail, I moved deeper into the forest where ponderosa pines grew densely, filtering the afternoon light into dappled patterns. The drag marks continued nearly a mile before reaching a rock outcropping at the base of a cliff face. There, they disappeared at what appeared to be a narrow cave entrance, partially obscured by brush. My instinct screamed to wait for backup, but a faint sound changed everything. A human voice calling weakly for help from within. I radioed my location and intention to investigate, then approached cautiously. The cave mouth was larger than it first appeared, tall and narrow like a doorway. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately. My flashlight revealed a passage sloping downward, marked with the same drag signs I'd been following. Park Service, can you hear me? I called, my voice echoing back. Help, please. A woman's voice, barely audible. I descended carefully, marking my path with trail tape. The passage widened into a chamber where centuries of water had carved the limestone into fantastic formations. The air smelled of minerals and that same musky odor I'd encountered before. My light found her. Melissa Chen, according to the search report, curled against the far wall. Blood matted her dark hair, but her eyes were alert with terror. He took Jason deeper, she whispered as I reached her, examining her injuries. It walked like a man but wasn't human. I'm getting you out, I said, helping her stand. Can you walk? She nodded weakly. It keeps coming back, bringing things, food, looking at us, like it's studying us. Where's Jason now? She pointed toward a smaller tunnel branching from the main chamber. It dragged him that way after he tried to communicate with it. I heard screaming, then nothing. I faced an impossible choice: get Melissa to safety or search for Jason. Protocol was clear: secure the survivor first. I need to get you out, I decided. Then I'll come back with a team for Jason. She gripped my arm with surprising strength. It's intelligent and territorial. Jason thought he was just looking for evidence, but he was provoking it. Playing those recordings, leaving food. What recordings? Supposed Bigfoot calls. He found them online. Screams, wood-knocking patterns. Said they were territorial challenges. Her voice broke. It worked. We were halfway to the entrance when we heard it. Heavy footsteps approaching from the tunnel behind us. The sound echoed strangely, making it impossible to judge distance. Move, I urged, supporting her weight as we hurried toward daylight. We'd nearly reached the entrance when a massive shadow blocked our path. Not from behind, but from outside. The creature had circled around, cutting off our escape. Backlit by afternoon sun, I finally saw it clearly. Over 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered and covered in dark reddish-brown hair. Its face was startlingly expressive, deep-set eyes reflecting intelligence under a pronounced brow ridge, a wide nose, jaw jutting beneath lips pulled back to reveal teeth too human for comfort. It carried something, a broken branch held like a club. This was no bear, no known animal. This was exactly what my grandmother's stories described. Yitzo, the big giant of the Navajo. The creature made a series of sounds, guttural barks followed by something almost like speech. When neither of us responded, it slammed the branch against the cave wall with such force that stone chips exploded outward. Melissa whimpered. I forced my voice steady. We're leaving, I said clearly, as though it might understand. We mean no harm. The creature tilted its head, studying us. Then, deliberately, it placed something on the ground. A torn backpack I recognized from the campsite photos. Jason's equipment. It pushed the backpack toward us with the branch, then stepped slightly aside, partially clearing the entrance. A test. An exchange. The backpack for our freedom. I slowly reached for the pack, maintaining eye contact with the creature. As my fingers touched the fabric, it made that strange barking sound again. Not threatening, almost questioning. Thank you, I said, slinging the pack over my shoulder. The creature watched us edge past. Massive body tense but unmoving. Only when we were fully outside did it retreat into the shadow of the cave entrance, still visible but no longer blocking our path. Melissa collapsed once we were clear, shock and exhaustion overtaking her. I radioed our position, requesting immediate medical evacuation. Only then did I look inside the backpack. Jason's journal was there, along with his camera and research materials. But something new had been added, a small carved wooden figure, roughly humanoid but with exaggerated features. Primitive but deliberate artwork, and on the last page of the journal, below Jason's final entry, was a crude drawing pressed into the paper from outside, not written with a pen but gouged with something sharp. It showed stick figures, 2 small ones clearly humans, and 1 large figure beside what appeared to be a cave entrance. The creature hadn't just taken their belongings, it had added its own message. When the rescue team arrived minutes later, they found me staring at the cave entrance, where 2 reflective eyes still watched from the shadows. Where's the other hiker? The team leader asked. I closed the journal. Still missing. Possible bear attack. But I knew Jason wasn't coming back. He had entered territory where humans weren't welcome, challenged its guardian, and paid the price for his intrusion. And now, that guardian knew who I was. The rescue team airlifted Melissa to Flagstaff Medical Center while I debriefed with search coordinators. I gave them the facts, minus the impossible parts. Jason remained officially missing, and by nightfall, deteriorating weather conditions forced the search to be suspended until morning. Back at my cabin, I locked every window and door before examining the contents of Jason's pack more thoroughly. His research was disturbing, not just for its subject matter, but for its thoroughness. He'd compiled historical sightings throughout the Southwest, overlaying them with cave systems and remote archaeological sites. He'd interviewed elders from various tribes, including my own, collecting stories about the guardians of sacred places. Most alarming was his methodology for making contact, a systematic escalation of provocations designed to elicit a response, wood-knocking, territorial calls, and finally, deliberate trespassing into areas marked as spiritually significant in traditional stories. He'd been looking for exactly what found him. I called my grandmother again, this time telling her everything. You've been marked now, she said quietly. It knows your scent, your voice. These beings remember. What does it want? The same as any sovereign defender, respect for boundaries. When that fails, they demand fear. She paused. But the offering exchange means something. It could have taken you both. What should I do? Listen to what the old stories actually say, not what people want to hear. These aren't friendly forest guardians or misunderstood animals. They're intelligent, territorial, and ancient. They lived alongside our ancestors through understanding in separate spaces. What they can't tolerate is disrespect and intrusion. After we disconnected, I sat with her words. The Park Service had documentation of unusual incidents going back decades. Missing hikers, unexplained noises, rangers requesting transfers after isolated patrols. All of it carefully categorized as animal encounters, environmental hazards, or psychological stress. Sleep evaded me again. Every creak of the cabin's wooden structure, every whisper of wind became potential movement outside. Around midnight, something heavy walked across my porch. The footsteps paused at my door, followed by what sounded like sniffing along the doorframe. I clutched my grandmother's pendant, heart thundering in my chest. listening as whatever stood outside slowly circled the cabin. It stopped at each window, lingering longest at my bedroom. Something scraped against the glass, not claws, but knuckles, deliberate, testing. When morning finally came, I found no footprints on the rain-softened ground, only broken branches arranged in an X pattern at the edge of the clearing, a boundary marker. At the ranger station, the search for Jason resumed with additional personnel, including wildlife experts and tribal liaisons. I was assigned coordination duty rather than field search, a decision that brought both relief and guilt. Mid-morning, my supervisor called me into his office. "Melissa Chen's been interviewed," he said, his expression troubled. "She's making some unusual claims about what happened out there. Trauma can affect perception," I offered neutrally. "She specifically mentioned your reaction." He studied my face, said you weren't surprised by what you saw, that you seemed to know what it was. I manufactured a puzzled expression. "I responded to a wildlife encounter according to training. Beyond that, I can't speculate on what she thought she saw." He nodded slowly. "There's something else. This area has a history of incidents. Most don't make official records, but they're there if you know where to look." He tapped a folder on his desk. 3 disappearances in the past decade, all near Broken Horn Mesa. Dozens of reported sightings classified as unverified wildlife encounters. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're Navajo. Because you obviously didn't put everything in your report." He leaned forward. "And because I need to know what we're dealing with." I weighed my options, then chose carefully measured truth. The Dene and other tribes have stories about beings who protect certain territories. My grandmother would say we've encroached on spaces we agreed to leave undisturbed. And scientifically, I observed a large, bipedal hominid demonstrating tool use and territorial behavior consistent with great ape species. Except no recognized great ape exists in North America. He didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, he opened the folder and pushed forward several photographs. Blurry images of large footprints, dark figures at forest edges, and strange arrangements of broken trees. "This doesn't leave this office," he said. "But you're not the first ranger to report this. We have an unofficial protocol. Document, protect the public through area closures, citing environmental concerns, and maintain distance." "You knew," I said, understanding dawning. "You've always known. Some things don't belong in official reports, but that doesn't mean we ignore the reality on the ground." He closed the folder. "Whispering Cave and the Eastern Trail System are now closed for geological assessment. I've requested you for solo patrol of the boundary areas." "You want me to monitor it?" "I want you to establish a working boundary. Make it clear which areas are human spaces and which aren't. Your grandmother would understand." That afternoon, I hiked to the ridge overlooking both the cave entrance and my cabin. Following my grandmother's instructions, I created small offerings at natural boundary points, arrangements of corn pollen, blue cornmeal, and tobacco placed on flat stones. Not as supplication, but as markers of mutual respect. As sunset painted the canyon walls crimson, I sensed rather than saw movement in the tree line below. A large figure stood partially concealed among the pines, watching me complete the boundary ritual. When I finished and stood facing its direction, it raised one massive arm, not threatening, but acknowledging. That night, no footsteps circled my cabin, but in the morning, I found my offerings had been replaced with others, a perfect arrangement of pine cones, unusual stones, and what appeared to be strands of reddish-brown hair deliberately placed at each site. The message was clear. Boundaries accepted. For now. In the weeks that followed, Jason's body was never recovered. The official report listed him as a probable victim of wildlife predation. Melissa Chen eventually recanted her more fantastic claims, accepting the easier explanation of a bear encounter distorted by trauma, but the boundaries remained. I maintained them dutifully during my patrols, refreshing offerings and ensuring no hikers strayed into the newly restricted areas. Occasionally, I would find signs of the territory's guardian, strange arrangements of forest materials, half-hidden observation from distant ridgelines, or wood-knocking sounds that followed me at respectful distances. One evening, returning from patrol, I found a deer carcass placed precisely at the edge of my cabin clearing, freshly killed, positioned deliberately where my property met the wilderness. Not threatening, but demonstrating capability. Later that night, I heard movement as it was reclaimed, a reminder that peaceful coexistence required ongoing mutual respect. The things my grandmother had tried to teach me finally made sense. This land had never truly been conquered or tamed, only temporarily accommodated through generations of careful understanding now being forgotten. As modern intrusions pushed deeper into ancient territories, the Guardians were responding in kind. What Jason had categorized as Cryptozoological curiosities were actually the final warnings before the collapse of long-established boundaries, and I now stood directly at that fragile border, marked by both sides as its keeper. Summer brought increased visitor traffic and new challenges. From my strengthened position as Boundary Patrol Specialist, I quietly redirected hikers from sensitive areas, citing environmental concerns rather than the truth. Most accepted the explanations without question. Few noticed the subtle boundary markers I maintained or the occasional wood knocking that followed routine patrols. My cabin became a paradoxical space, both refuge and frontier. I'd reinforced the structure, replacing flimsy locks with sturdier mechanisms and installing motion-sensing lights. Yet I also created a designated offering space at the property edge, where I would occasionally leave small tokens, tobacco, cornmeal, or honey, following traditional protocols my grandmother had taught me. Sometimes these offerings remained untouched. Other times they vanished, replaced with unusual stones, oddly shaped branches, or once, a perfect spiral of pine needles arranged with mathematical precision. I documented everything in a private journal, creating a record of this strange communication. Park administration remained willfully oblivious to the specifics while supporting my boundary management. Additional funding appeared for wildlife corridor preservation and indigenous cultural site protection, bureaucratic cover for what we were really doing, establishing a truce. Then came the university research team. They arrived in early July, 4 graduate students and their professor, Dr. Eleanor Marsh, armed with permits to study anthropogenic effects on wildlife behavior patterns in our sector. Their real agenda became clear during our orientation meeting. We're particularly interested in documenting large mammal responses to human territorial markers, Dr. Marsh explained, displaying equipment that included night vision cameras, audio recording devices, and habitat disruption testing protocols. My supervisor shot me a warning glance. What exactly does habitat disruption testing involve? I asked carefully. Controlled stimuli to provoke natural defensive responses, she replied smoothly. Nothing invasive. Sound projections, scent markers, temporary human presence in untraveled corridors, exactly what Jason had been doing before his disappearance. Unfortunately, your proposed research areas are currently under environmental assessment, my supervisor interjected. We can offer alternative locations in the western sector. Dr. Marsh's smile tightened. Our permits specifically cover the eastern ridge and mesa formations. The reported wildlife activity patterns there are central to our research. What wildlife specifically? I asked. Her eyes met mine with unexpected intensity. Large, unidentified bipedal mammals, Ranger Tsinagini. I believe you've filed several reports about them yourself. The room grew silent. My supervisor cleared his throat. Those reports describe standard bear activity. Nothing more. Of course, Dr. Marsh replied, her tone making it clear she didn't believe it. Bears walking on 2 legs, using tools, and responding to knock sequences. Perfectly normal bear behavior. After the meeting, my supervisor pulled me aside. They're Jason's colleagues. He sent data before disappearing. They're going to get themselves killed, I said. Or worse, they'll provoke retaliation beyond the boundaries we've established. Keep them out of restricted zones without telling them why. That's an order. The research team set up base camp in the approved western sector but immediately began requesting short excursions into eastern territories. I denied each request with increasing difficulty, as they grew more persistent and creative with their justifications. One evening, returning from patrol, I discovered their jeep parked near the Whispering Cave trailhead, precisely where they shouldn't be. Tracks showed all 5 researchers had headed toward the restricted area carrying equipment. I radioed for backup and followed, moving quickly along the path. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls deep red as shadows lengthened across the trail. They had at least an hour's head start. When I reached the cave entrance, I found research equipment already deployed. Motion sensors, cameras, and audio recording devices arranged in a perimeter. The cave security chain had been cut. Inside, I heard voices echoing, excited academic discussion about spatial measurements and subject habitat preferences. I descended quickly, calling out warnings that bounced off stone walls. I found them in the main chamber, setting up additional equipment, while Dr. Marsh examined the wall markings with unusual interest. This area is restricted, I announced, startling the group. You need to pack up immediately. Ranger Tsinagini, Dr. Marsh acknowledged without surprise. We received special permission from regional administration this afternoon. The paperwork is probably still processing through your local office. A lie, but a strategically effective one that would take hours to disprove. Even with permission, these caves are structurally unsound after dark, I insisted. We need to exit now and discuss this above ground. We're almost finished with initial deployment, she countered. Just a few more minutes to set the audio attractants. One student was already configuring a speaker system. Another unpacked what looked like food items. Raw meat and fruit arranged on sampling plates. "What exactly are you trying to attract?" I demanded. Dr. Marsh's professional facade slipped, revealing the fervent enthusiasm beneath. "You know exactly what's here, Ranger." Jason's audio recordings were clear. His journal entries, the photos he managed to send, were standing in the anthropological discovery of the century. She gestured around the cave. A living hominid species unknown to science, using these cave systems as shelters, demonstrating tool use and potential proto-language capabilities. "Dr. Marsh, you need to understand." I was interrupted by a sound that froze my blood. 3 distinct wood knocks, echoing from deeper in the cave system. Not random or natural. Deliberate communication. The students fell silent. Dr. Marsh's eyes widened with vindication. "It's here," she whispered. "Start the call sequence." Before I could stop him, a student activated the speaker system. A series of recorded howls and knocking patterns, similar to what Jason had used, echoed through the chamber at high volume. "Turn that off," I shouted. But the damage was done. The response came immediately, not from deeper in the cave, but from multiple directions at once. Knocking sounds, then low, rumbling growls that vibrated the stone beneath our feet. "Multiple subjects," Dr. Marsh breathed, activating her recording equipment. "At least 3 distinct vocalizations. We need to leave. Now." I drew my sidearm. "Standard issue for predator defense. These aren't your research subjects. This is their territory and you've just challenged them directly." The first massive shadow appeared at the passage to our right, a silhouette briefly illuminated by a student's camera flash. The second emerged from the left tunnel almost simultaneously, both over 7 feet tall, broader than any human, moving with surprising grace for their size. "Incredible," Dr. Marsh whispered, raising her camera instead of retreating. The creatures advanced slowly, communicating with each other through series of clicks and low vocalizations. Unlike my previous encounters, they made no attempt to remain partially hidden. Their movements suggested not fear or caution, but coordinated purpose. "Back toward the entrance," I ordered, positioning myself between the researchers and the approaching figures. Slow, non-threatening movements. Most of the students complied, gathering equipment with shaking hands. Dr. Marsh remained rooted, documenting everything. "They're displaying classic territorial behavior," she narrated into a recorder. "Note the chest-beating display from the larger specimen. Possible dominance ritual or warning. We've violated their space and safety protocols," I countered, tugging her arm. "This isn't a nature documentary." A third figure appeared at the main entrance passage, our escape route, effectively surrounding us. This one was the largest yet, with silver-streaked hair suggesting age. It carried a crude but effective club, a branch reinforced with bound stones. Dr. Marsh finally registered the danger. "Territorial display only," she insisted, her academic certainty wavering. "They won't actually." The nearest creature suddenly charged forward with shocking speed, stopping just short of our group. It slammed massive fists against the ground, then rose to its full height with a roar that reverberated through the chamber. In the chaos that followed, I managed to guide the panicked researchers toward a narrow side passage, not the main entrance, but a potential escape route to the upper levels. As we retreated, the creatures began destroying the abandoned research equipment, smashing cameras and tearing apart the speaker system. "My research!" Dr. Marsh cried, attempting to turn back. I physically restrained her. "Your life is more important. Move." We navigated the narrow passage, emerging eventually at a small opening halfway up the canyon wall. Night had fallen completely, leaving us to descend the steep slope by flashlight. Behind us, wood-knocking sounds tracked our movement. The creatures were following our escape, communicating our position to others outside. When we finally reached the parking area, I ordered everyone into their vehicle. "Drive directly to the ranger station. Report to my supervisor. Do not stop anywhere in between," I instructed, handing the keys to the most composed student. "Where are you going?" Dr. Marsh demanded. "To salvage what I can of the boundaries you just shattered," I replied, already moving toward my own vehicle. As their headlights disappeared down the access road, I turned back toward the darkened trail. Wood knocks continued from multiple directions in the forest, an alarm system spreading news of the intrusion throughout the territory. The carefully maintained balance I'd established was now broken. The question was whether it could be restored, or if more drastic measures would follow. I reached for my radio, then hesitated. Some situations couldn't be solved by conventional backup. This required older methods. I opened my patrol vehicle's emergency kit and removed the small pouch my grandmother had prepared months ago. Following her instructions, I scattered the contents in a circle around me and began the ancient words of reconciliation, not as a park ranger, but as Kaya Chinagini, carrying the knowledge of my ancestors who had lived alongside these beings since time immemorial. As I spoke the words, the knocking sounds gradually ceased. The forest fell into an unnatural silence, as if every creature held its breath. I finished the ritual by placing an offering at the trailhead, blue cornmeal, tobacco, and strands of my own hair, signifying personal commitment. Through the darkness I sensed, rather than saw them, massive figures keeping distance but observing. I stood my ground, weaponless now, and waited. Finally the largest of them approached, moving with surprising silence for its size. In the dim moonlight I could make out silver-streaked fur and eyes that reflected like amber pools. It stopped at the edge of the offering circle, studying what I had placed there. With deliberate movements it added a small object to my offering, a polished stone bearing ancient pictographs, likely taken from deep within the cave system. Then it made a series of gestures, pointing to the stone, to me, then sweeping its arm toward the distant boundary of the restricted zone. The message was clear. The boundaries would be re-established, but with new terms. When I returned to the ranger station, I found a disaster unfolding. Dr. Marsh was animatedly sharing her groundbreaking discovery with my supervisor, and 2 regional administrators called in for emergency consultation. Her students were downloading salvaged photos and audio recordings, creating backup copies on multiple devices. "Ranger Tsunagini," she called when I entered. Perfect timing. We were just discussing an expanded research presence to properly document what we encountered. My supervisor shot me a desperate look. "Dr. Marsh," I said carefully, "I need to speak with you privately about what happened tonight." "No need for secrecy," she replied dismissively. "Everyone here now understands the significance of our discovery. A living hominid species, potentially an evolutionary branch separate from known great apes. Possibly even a surviving population of early human relatives. What you encountered tonight wasn't a research opportunity," I said firmly. "It was a warning." Her enthusiasm faltered. "Warning? Those were territorial displays, nothing more. They destroyed your equipment instead of harming you. Next time, they won't be so restrained." The regional administrator stepped forward. "Ranger Tsunagini, are you suggesting these creatures pose an actual threat to authorized personnel?" "I'm stating that they are intelligent beings who have tolerated our presence under specific conditions that were violated tonight." I turned to Dr. Marsh. "Your research methodology mirrors exactly what Jason Blackwood was doing before he disappeared." Silence fell over the room. "You think they took Jason?" one of the students whispered. "I know they did," I replied, "and I know why." Over the next hour, I laid out everything: the boundary system we'd established, the communication patterns, and the delicate balance now threatened by their intrusion. I carefully presented it as both traditional ecological knowledge and practical risk management, navigating between spiritual understanding and bureaucratic necessity. To my surprise, the regional administrator was receptive. "This isn't the first such situation in the park system," she admitted. "There are protocols for what we classify as culturally sensitive territorial anomalies." "That's bureaucratic nonsense," Dr. Marsh interjected. "We're talking about an undocumented species of scientific importance. We're talking about beings that have successfully remained undocumented because they choose to be," I countered. "That choice deserves respect." By morning, new directives had come down from regional headquarters. The entire eastern sector would be redesignated as a cultural heritage preservation zone, with strictly limited access. Dr. Marsh's research permits were modified to allow only non-invasive observation from designated safe zones, with no calls, provocations, or boundary crossings permitted. She was furious, but outmaneuvered by the combined authority of park administration and newly involved tribal representatives who arrived by midday. As the bureaucratic machinery shifted to contain the situation, I returned to the boundary line carrying new offerings and formal acknowledgments prepared by tribal elders. At each station along the perimeter, I renewed the markers according to ancient protocols, strengthening the understanding between territories. At the final marker, overlooking both the cave system and my cabin, I found evidence they had already been there. The ground cleared in a perfect circle, with a complex arrangement of stones, pine needles, and small bones forming a map-like pattern in the center. I recognized my cabin, the cave entrances, and the main hiking trails, all illustrated in this primitive but precise way. Certain areas were marked with red ochre, boundary lines newly drawn from their perspective. They were negotiating, communicating their terms through means I could understand. I honored their proposal, adding cornmeal to mark my acceptance of the new limitations. As I completed the ritual, wood knocks sounded from 3 directions around me. acknowledgement from watchers I couldn't see. The boundaries were restored, but forever changed. I had become more than just a park ranger enforcing human regulations. I was now recognized by both sides as the designated intermediary between worlds that were never meant to fully intersect. That night in my cabin, I wrote everything in my private journal, recording the true history that would never appear in official reports. Outside, occasional knocks and calls sounded from the forest edge, not threatening now, but communicative, establishing the new normal of our coexistence. I finally understood why my grandmother had warned me against this posting, and also why the position had been offered to me specifically. Some boundaries required guardians who understood both sides of the line. The land had chosen me as much as I had chosen it. Autumn painted the canyon with gold and crimson as summer's heat surrendered to the first cold whispers of approaching winter. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in Whispering Cave, and an uneasy stability had settled over the Eastern Territory. My role had evolved beyond standard ranger duties. Officially, I was now Indigenous Cultural Site Protection Specialist, a title created to justify my focused work maintaining the boundary zones. Unofficially, I had become something my grandmother called in Navajo, the one who speaks between worlds. Dr. Marsh's research team continued their work under heavy restrictions, confined to observation platforms far from sensitive areas. Their cameras occasionally captured distant figures moving through the forest, but nothing clear enough for definitive scientific documentation. This frustrated Dr. Marsh but satisfied park administration, who wanted neither public panic nor scientific controversy. My cabin had transformed as well. The walls now displayed maps marking safe zones and restricted territories, along with my growing collection of gifts left at boundary markers, unusual stones, crafted wooden objects, and once, a perfect arrowhead of obvious antiquity. My grandmother had visited once, examining these offerings with knowing eyes. "They're teaching you their language," she'd said, arranging the items in a specific pattern, learning yours in return. The communication had indeed grown more sophisticated. Wood knocks and calls had evolved into pattern-based exchanges. 3 knocks from the forest edge might signal a boundary crossing by unwary hikers, allowing me to intercept them before they ventured too deeply into restricted areas. In return, I developed my own signals, specific arrangements of stones or branches to indicate official patrols or necessary maintenance work. When October brought the first snowfall, I noticed new behavior patterns. The territory's inhabitants began moving closer to human areas than before, particularly at night. Motion sensors near outbuildings triggered more frequently. Footprints appeared closer to hiking trails. Something had changed. "It's the cold," my grandmother explained when I called her. "They've always moved with the seasons. Your boundaries must flex with the weather." Following her guidance, I adjusted the perimeters, creating designated winter zones, where territorial overlap would be temporarily permitted. At these new boundaries, I left special offerings, not just symbolic items, but practical ones. Jars of honey, dried meat, even a folded emergency blanket. These offerings vanished immediately, replaced with new tokens of acknowledgement, a bundle of useful plants with medicinal properties, shaped stones that fit perfectly in the human hand, and occasionally small carved figures depicting what I recognized as humans and non-humans standing together. My supervisor observed these changes with nervous pragmatism. "They're moving closer to heat sources and food storage," he noted during our monthly review. "Standard wildlife winterization behavior. It's more deliberate than that," I replied. "They're communicating needs and expectations. The seasonal movement follows traditional patterns documented in indigenous oral histories." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Regional administration wants assurances this won't lead to incidents. Dr. Marsh is pushing hard for expanded winter research permissions, claiming seasonal behavior changes justify closer observation." "That would be a serious mistake," I warned. "The current balance is delicate but functional. Increased human presence during their vulnerable period would be perceived as threatening." "Keep them separate," he instructed. "Whatever it takes." The first major winter storm arrived in mid-November, dropping 3 feet of snow in 2 days. Park operations scaled back to emergency services only, with most staff evacuating to town. I remained at my cabin, maintaining essential monitoring and communications. On the storm's 3rd night, temperatures plunged below zero. Wind howled around my cabin, rattling windows and driving snow into drifts that reached halfway up the walls. I kept the wood stove burning continuously, grateful for the summer months I'd spent stockpiling firewood. Shortly after midnight, something heavy moved onto my porch. Not the usual cautious approach. This was desperate, forceful. The door shook with impact. Not quite a knock, but not random either. I approached cautiously, sidearm ready, and called out, "I hear you. What do you need?" A strange sound answered, Something between a moan and a vocalization I hadn't heard before. Then scratching at the doorframe, rhythmic and deliberate, making a decision that contradicted every safety protocol. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack, keeping the chain engaged. Outside stood one of them, a younger individual I'd observed occasionally at boundary markers. It was hunched against the driving snow, arms wrapped around something held against its chest. When it saw me, it made that strange sound again, then slowly extended its arms to reveal what it carried, an infant. Small, fur-covered, but unmistakably one of their young. It wasn't moving. Without hesitation, I released the chain and opened the door fully. "Bring it inside," I said, stepping back. The adult hesitated, eyes darting around the cabin interior. Trust warred with ancient caution in its expression. Then the wind gusted brutally, driving ice crystals like needles, and necessity overcame fear. It stepped inside, ducking to clear the doorframe. Up close, the differences and similarities between us became starker. Its massively powerful frame contrasted with surprisingly dexterous hands now carefully cradling the infant. Its face, while structurally different from human, displayed emotions I could read clearly. Fear, desperation, hope. "Let me see," I said softly, gesturing to the infant. Reluctantly, it allowed me closer. The young one was breathing, but barely, its small chest rising in shallow, irregular movements. Its skin felt cold even through the fur, and its eyes remained closed. "Hypothermia," I diagnosed. "It needs warmth, gradually. May I?" After a moment's hesitation, the adult relinquished the infant into my arms. I moved carefully to the wood stove, explaining my actions in a calm voice, though I had no idea if my words were understood. "We'll warm slowly. Too fast is dangerous." I grabbed blankets, creating a nest near but not directly beside the stove. Over the next hour, I worked to raise the infant's temperature, using techniques from wilderness first aid training. The adult watched every movement with intense focus, occasionally making soft vocalizations to the young one, who eventually began to respond with weak movements. When the infant finally opened its eyes, deep amber like its parents, a palpable relief filled the cabin. The adult made a sound unlike any I'd heard before, almost a purr, and reached out cautiously. I returned the now active infant, watching as the adult examined it carefully, then held it close in what could only be described as an embrace. Now came the uncertain part. Protocol, training, and self-preservation all demanded I document this encounter, report it immediately, perhaps even attempt to secure samples or evidence. The scientist and Dr. Marsh would have already been collecting hair specimens and photographs. Instead, I made a different choice. I gathered supplies, emergency blankets, hand warmers, dried food, and placed them in a pack. I added a jar of honey and, after a moment's consideration, the small carved figure I'd received at a boundary marker weeks earlier. "For the winter," I said, offering the pack. "For your family." The adult studied me, intelligence evident in its gaze. Then, still holding the infant with one arm, it reached out with its free hand, not for the pack, but toward my face. I remained still, fighting instinctive fear as powerful fingers gently touched my cheek, then withdrew. Communication. It took the pack, adjusted the now active infant securely against its chest, and moved toward the door. I opened it to find the storm had temporarily calmed, leaving a clear path through the snow. At the porch edge, the adult turned back. What happened next challenges everything science claims to know about these beings. It made a series of sounds, not random vocalizations, but patterned, intentional, distinct syllables. "Nayacha. Nayacha." Then it was gone, moving with surprising speed despite the deep snow, disappearing into the forest darkness. I never reported the encounter officially. In my boundary maintenance logs, I simply noted evidence of seasonal movement and successful resource management. But in my private journal, I recorded everything, including those final sounds that I played over repeatedly in my mind. When I finally visited my grandmother again, I repeated the sounds for her. Her eyes widened in recognition. "It is an old word," she said, "from before our languages grew apart. It means life-giver or healer." She squeezed my hand. "It was thanking you and naming you." Winter deepened, bringing more storms and further seasonal adjustments to our boundary systems. Occasionally I would find small gifts left near my cabin. Useful items like bundled kindling, arranged in distinctive patterns, or once, a freshly killed rabbit placed respectfully at the designated offering site. The research team departed as weather made their work impossible, promising to return in spring. Dr. Marsh remained frustrated by her limited findings but had secured funding for another season based on tantalizing but inconclusive evidence. My supervisor never questioned why certain supplies disappeared from my monthly inventory: extra emergency blankets, first aid items, preserved foods. He simply processed the requisitions without comment. Perhaps he understood more than he acknowledged. On the winter solstice, the longest night, I followed my grandmother's instructions and placed special offerings at each boundary marker despite the bitter cold. At the final site, overlooking the now snow-covered expanse of the Eastern Territory, I sensed rather than saw them gathering in the forest below. One by one, wood knocks sounded from different positions, not random but in sequence, creating a pattern that circled the entire boundary before returning to where it began. An acknowledgement, a ceremony of their own. As I turned to leave, I heard it once more from directly behind me, closer than I'd expected. Neyacha. I didn't turn around. Some boundaries shouldn't be crossed, even when the invitation seems clear. Instead, I made the wood knock response I'd learned over months of communication, 3 distinct sounds that meant, in their developing language between us, I hear you, I respect the boundary, I will return. That night, as snow fell softly outside my cabin window, I added the final entry to my journal. We call them monsters because we fear what we don't understand. We hunt for evidence to classify and control them. We invade their dwindling territories with our curiosity and cameras, never considering they might be studying us in return, measuring our capacity for respect, for coexistence, for wisdom. The Dine stories never called them monsters. They called them the first people, those who came before, the guardians of sacred places. They were never legends to be debunked or creatures to be discovered. They were neighbors with whom careful boundaries were maintained. I came to this wilderness running from financial problems and seeking simple employment. I found instead an ancient diplomacy that requires renewed attention. The boundaries between our worlds have always been permeable, maintained not by force but by mutual understanding. Tonight, as the year turns toward new beginnings, I accept the name given to me, Naya Cha, and the responsibility it carries. Not just healer of one infant on one desperate night, but healer of boundaries long neglected. They are watching us from the shadows of Broken Horn Mesa, not with malice, but with the wary patience of those who have seen civilizations rise and fall while they remained. They don't need our discovery or our validation. Perhaps, in the end, it is not they who are hiding, it is we who have forgotten how to see. The forest speaks in many tongues, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of streams, the calls of creatures unseen. As a senior ranger for the Hiawatha National Forest Service, I've learned to interpret these voices, but there are sounds that have no translation, utterances from something that doesn't belong in these woods. This is my account of what happened in Michigan's Upper Peninsula in the autumn of 1997, a record I've kept hidden until now. I always thought being a park ranger in a place like Michigan's Upper Peninsula was going to be easy. Wide open forests, freshwater lakes as far as the eye could see, and the isolation of the wilderness were exactly what I wanted. I never imagined that isolation could take on a darker meaning. The year was 1997. My name is Ron Whitman. Before I landed this job, I had worked a desk for 5 years in a dull insurance office in Chicago. That was enough to make anyone crave fresh air and solitude. Moving up here felt like a permanent vacation at first. I'd grown up fishing with my dad on Lake Superior, so it seemed like a dream come true, trading paperwork for trail maintenance and visitor questions about where to spot bald eagles. My first 6 months passed like a dream. Spring thawed into summer, bringing waves of tourists eager to experience the untamed beauty of the peninsula. I spent my days marking trails, explaining local wildlife to wide-eyed city folks, and occasionally rescuing the odd, unprepared hiker. Nights were spent in my cabin on the edge of the Forest Service property, windows open to the symphony of cicadas and distant loon calls. By August, I had mapped sections of the wilderness that hadn't been properly surveyed in decades. My supervisor, Carl Bergman, a leathery man with 30 years of ranger service behind him, had taken a liking to me. "Whitman," he'd say, slapping my shoulder with calloused hands, "you're taking to this life like you were born for it." I was. The solitude that drove others mad after weeks in the backcountry was a balm to me. The forest became an extension of myself. I could sense changes in weather by the way pine needles shifted, could tell which animals had passed by, reading subtle signs most would overlook. The locals accepted me gradually, as they did with any outsider who proved they weren't just passing through. I'd join them at Marge's Tavern in the nearby town of Whitefish Harbor on my days off, listening to tales of strange lights over the lake and century-old logging accidents that still haunted these woods. "The peninsula keeps its secrets," old Jim Redpath told me one evening over his third whiskey. "Been here since before the first white man set foot, and they'll be here long after we're gone." I remember laughing, thinking he was just spinning yarns for the new ranger. Folklore was rich up here, Stories of wendigos and phantom ships on Superior, the kind of tales that made tourist campfires more exciting. Late August brought a series of unusual reports. 3 separate hiking groups reported hearing unnatural sounds near the eastern trails. Carl dismissed it as elk or maybe a territorial black bear. Standard procedure was to post notices at trailheads and check the areas for signs of aggressive wildlife. Then came Labor Day weekend, our last major tourist influx before the season wound down. A family of 4 from Wisconsin claimed their campsite had been surrounded by something during the night. Nothing was seen, but their children were hysterical, and they packed up at dawn. Something was circling us, the father insisted, his face ashen despite the summer tan. Not walking, not like an animal. It was deliberate. The following week, a backpacker named Daniel Schreiber failed to check in after a planned 3-day solo hike. Search and rescue found his campsite intact, food hanging properly from trees, tent set up correctly, even his journal open to his last entry. The final words written were, "Third night. The sounds are back, closer this time. Not animal. Need to investigate." His boots were still there, his backpack. Everything except Daniel himself. I was part of the search team. We combed that area for 8 days before weather forced us to scale back. The official report listed him as missing, presumed injured or disoriented. But there was something unspoken among the rangers. The tracks we found didn't match any known wildlife. Deep impressions that seemed to appear and disappear at random, as if whatever made them could step in and out of our world at will. By mid-September, the tourists had thinned to weekenders and retirees in RVs. The forest took on a different quality then, colors beginning to turn, a certain stillness in the air, as if the wilderness was holding its breath before winter's plunge. Carl called me into his office on a Thursday morning. His usual jovial demeanor had been replaced by something more somber. "Ron, I need someone to check out the area around Dead Man's Creek," he said, unfolding a topographic map across his desk. "We've had more reports of strange noises, and some hunters found what they described as unusual markings on trees about 2 miles in." "Animal marks?" I asked. Carl hesitated. "They said they were too precise, too high up. Geometric almost. Could be kids," I offered. "Plenty of locals know those woods." "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. "Take the radio, document anything unusual, and be back before dark." As I prepared my gear that evening, I felt an unfamiliar sensation, a prickling at the back of my neck, like someone watching from just beyond the tree line. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the stories I'd heard, and the disappearance of Daniel Schreiber. Little did I know that what waited for me in those woods would challenge everything I understood about nature, reality, and what truly lurks in places humans have only tentatively claimed. The trouble started in September, around the time tourists usually began thinning out. That part of the year, it's mostly locals who still camp or hike the remote areas of the woods. I was assigned to check on a couple of trails that had reports of people hearing strange noises. Now, it's not rare for animals to start making a bit of a racket as winter approaches. Elk, for example, can sound pretty eerie if you're not familiar with their bugle calls. I set out at dawn, my government-issue Ford Ranger cutting through the morning mist that clung to the forest floor like phantom fingers. The weather report promised clear skies, but up here, Mother Nature made her own rules. A heavy pack sat beside me. Extra layers, first aid kit, flares, water purification tablets, enough supplies to last 3 days, though I planned to be back by nightfall. The road to Dead Man's Creek was barely maintained, a relic from the logging days that the Forest Service kept open mainly for fire access. The name itself came from a century-old incident, a logger found face down in the water, his body apparently dragged there from miles away. Local legend claimed he'd encountered something in the deep woods, something the Ojibwe people refused to name. I parked at the trailhead and checked my watch, 6:48 a.m. Early light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows that shifted with the gentle breeze. I'd dressed in layers, thermal underwear beneath regulation khaki pants and shirt, a fleece pullover tied around my waist. My boots were well worn, comfortable for the 10-mile loop I planned to hike. The day I went out, it was just me and a thermos of lukewarm coffee, doing a loop around a 10-mile trail near Dead Man's Creek. That area doesn't get much traffic, which was fine by me. I had a pair of binoculars strapped around my neck, a notebook, and my old beat-up radio that sometimes decided it was more for show than actual communication. I was alone out there, so I thought. The first mile passed uneventfully. The trail wound along ridgelines that offered spectacular views of the forest canopy stretching like a multicolored ocean toward Lake Superior. Fall colors were just beginning their transformation. Hints of gold among the green, splashes of crimson on the sugar maples. In another few weeks, these woods would be ablaze with autumn glory. I spotted typical wildlife, a red fox darting across the path, a pileated woodpecker hammering at a dead birch, evidence of beaver activity near a small tributary. Normal, peaceful. I jotted observations in my notebook, mostly about trail conditions and possible maintenance needs for the coming spring. At the 2-mile marker, I noticed the first oddity, a perfect circle of white mushrooms about 6 feet in diameter. Fairy rings weren't uncommon, but this one had a peculiar feature. Every mushroom within it was oriented in the same direction, as if pointing further along the trail. I photographed it, more out of curiosity than concern. The morning warmed gradually, and I shed my outer layer as the sun climbed higher. By 10 o'clock, I'd covered nearly 4 miles, stopping occasionally to examine animal tracks or identify unusual plant growth. The forest had grown quieter the deeper I ventured, the typical background chorus of birds and insects fading to an unsettling silence. I tried calling in to the station, a routine check-in, but got only static. No surprise. The ravines in this area created natural dead zones for radio signals. I'd try again higher up. Just before noon, I reached a small clearing where hikers often stopped for lunch. A fire ring of stone sat in the center, long cold. But something caught my eye. Claw marks on a nearby oak tree, not the usual bear scratches I was accustomed to seeing. These were deeper, more deliberate, and arranged in a pattern that looked almost like primitive symbols. I ran my fingers over the grooves. They were fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored without the oxidation that would come with age. Whatever made these marks had done so recently, perhaps within the last day or two. Continuing on, I noticed other subtle changes in the forest. Broken branches too high for deer to reach, small areas where the undergrowth had been crushed in circular patterns, as if something heavy had sat or nested there. Animal behavior had changed too. No squirrels chattering, no birds flitting through branches. I was halfway through my hike when I saw the first sign something was off, a shredded backpack hanging from a tree branch. Too high for any normal animal to have placed it there. Black bears could climb, sure, but they don't exactly hang trophies. I called it in on the radio, hoping for a clear signal, but all I got was a wall of static. Great, I thought. The one day I could use this thing, it craps out. The backpack hung at least 15 feet up, suspended from a branch that would barely support my weight. It wasn't just torn, it was methodically shredded, each strip of fabric nearly identical in width, the contents removed. A student ID card lay on the ground beneath it. Daniel Schreiber, the missing hiker. My pulse quickened as I photographed everything, bagging the ID as evidence. The air had grown colder despite the midday sun, a penetrating chill that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. I checked my map, calculating the fastest route back to my truck. But professional responsibility won out over growing unease. I needed to document everything I could for the search team. I kept walking, and then, maybe another mile down the trail, I saw something worse. Pieces of fabric, torn clothes, scattered along the ground like someone had run right out of them. I crouched down to examine them, holding my breath. The clothes weren't weathered, hadn't been out here long. It was as if someone had just been ripped out of them and disappeared without a trace. Maybe a bear did this, I thought. Bears, when they're hungry or feel threatened, can go after people. But there were no bear tracks, just odd, deep impressions in the dirt, like something heavy but not human had passed through. The clothing was high-end outdoor gear, moisture-wicking shirts, thermal base layers, the kind of equipment serious hikers invested in. The tiers followed the same pattern as the backpack, methodical strips rather than random rips. And strangest of all, there was no blood, not even the smallest speck. I took out my notebook and jotted everything down. In my mind, I figured I'd call it in once I was back to the ranger station, but I kept walking forward because I'm an idiot who clearly doesn't know when to turn around. The trail narrowed as it descended toward Dead Man's Creek itself, the vegetation growing denser, less maintained. Old-growth trees blocked much of the sunlight, creating a premature twilight beneath their massive boughs. The temperature dropped further, my breath now visible in small clouds. A faint odor began to permeate the air, something organic yet foreign. Not the usual forest decay, but something pungent and metallic, like corroded copper mixed with rotting meat. I pulled my bandana over my nose, but it did little to filter the stench. The creek appeared around the next bend, its waters running clear and swift over smooth stones. Under normal circumstances, it would have been picturesque, but as I approached, I noticed something in the water. Flashes of white tumbling with the current. Bones, small ones, probably from deer or other forest creatures, but stripped completely clean and fractured in ways that spoke of tremendous force. I knelt by the stream's edge, using a stick to fish out one of the bone fragments. It was a deer femur snapped cleanly in the middle, with deep grooves etched along its length. Not the work of scavengers or natural decomposition. The noises started maybe 15 minutes later. At first it was a low, almost rhythmic thumping, like something huge was moving through the woods, stepping in time. I stopped in my tracks, my heart doing a little dance of its own, trying to listen closer. The sound stopped too. I laughed. Too much coffee, not enough breakfast probably. But then it started again, this time faster, and I swear it was following me. The rhythm matched no animal I knew. Too measured for a loping bear, too heavy for anything else that should be in these woods. It paused when I paused, resumed when I moved, a deliberate mimicry that sent ice through my veins. I began to walk, then jog, realizing I was picking up the pace to match whatever it was. I know this sounds ridiculous, but the trees felt like they were closing in on me, branches brushing against my arms, pulling at my sleeves. The forest I'd known intimately for months suddenly felt alien, hostile. Shadows deepened where no shadows should be. The path ahead seemed to shift subtly, landmarks I'd noted earlier appearing at odd angles or missing entirely. My ranger training told me to stay on the trail, but instinct screamed otherwise. I turned sharply off the trail, figuring if I could get some distance, I'd at least feel less like I was being hunted. What I found in that moment of desperate flight would forever change my understanding of the wilderness I thought I knew. What I stumbled upon next stopped me cold. The ground ahead of me was dark, not from shadow, but from blood. It was pooled thickly in the underbrush, splattered up the trunks of trees. There were pieces of something, someone, I realized, stomach flipping, spread out in a way that didn't seem possible. It wasn't just a body torn apart. It was disassembled. The limbs were bent back at unnatural angles, as if something had taken time to methodically separate them. I froze, then I did the stupid thing. I tried the radio again. Nothing. Not even static this time. The scene before me defied rational explanation. The blood pattern suggested violence beyond animal predation. It radiated outward from a central point as if exploded from within. The remains were arranged with a terrible precision, bones placed in parallel lines, organs separated by type and laid out like some grotesque taxonomy display. My forensics training, limited as it was to what rangers need for wildlife poaching cases, told me this was recent. Hours, not days. The blood hadn't fully congealed in the cool forest air. Based on the clothing fragments, this had likely been a male hiker in his 30s, possibly another victim beyond Schreiber. There wasn't going to be a lot of explaining to do. This scene spoke for itself. But that's when I heard it again. The thumping, closer now, and a low, slow breathing sound. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but I couldn't leave without documentation. With trembling hands, I withdrew my camera, forcing myself to photograph the scene systematically. Evidence first, fear second. They'd drilled that into us during training. Click, wind, click, wind. The mechanical process helped steady my nerves, gave me something to focus on besides the overwhelming horror surrounding me. I don't know why I looked behind me. Maybe I hoped I'd see another ranger, someone human, walking toward me. Instead, I saw it. Standing half hidden by trees was something taller than any person had any right to be. Its arms were long, unnaturally so, nearly dragging along the ground. Its face, or what I could make of it, was obscured by a tangled mess of hair or fur. The smell hit me before I even registered the rest of its body. Rot, decay, and something metallic. It was hunched, but still towering, and its fingers ended in long, sharp claws, slick with something I didn't want to identify. Time seemed to stretch, elasticized by terror. The creature stood unnaturally still, its only movement the slow rise and fall of breathing. 7 feet tall at minimum, its proportions wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Its skin, what I could see of it beneath the matted hair, was a pallid gray-green, with patches of what looked like lichen or fungal growth. But it was the eyes that froze my blood. Not animal eyes, not human either. They reflected no light yet somehow glowed from within, vertical pupils dilating as they fixed on me. Intelligence lurked there, cold and ancient, assessing me with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. I didn't wait. I took off, running in the direction I'd come, my feet pounding the earth harder than I ever thought I could manage. It was fast, though. Too fast, and I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind me. I didn't dare look back. Branches whipped against my face. My clothes snagged on thorn bushes, but I didn't care. The pursuit was unlike anything I'd experienced. The creature moved with a terrible efficiency, sometimes parallel to my path, sometimes behind, herding me like prey. It didn't vocalize, no roars or growls. just that measured breathing and the rhythmic impact of limbs against the forest floor. I veered sharply back toward the main trail, hoping the more open ground would give me some advantage. The creature seemed to anticipate this, crashing through a thicket to my right to intercept me. I caught a glimpse of it in full motion, limbs extending in ways that defied skeletal constraints, body undulating rather than running. I could feel my lungs burning, every step heavier than the last. If I could just make it to the trailhead, maybe I'd be able to call for help, real help, not this piece of junk radio I was carrying around like some kind of sick joke. A fallen tree blocked my path. Without breaking stride, I vaulted over it, landing awkwardly and twisting my ankle. Pain shot up my leg, but adrenaline pushed it aside. 20 yards behind me, the creature cleared the same obstacle, landing with the grace of a predator born to the hunt. The forest began to thin, sunlight penetrating the canopy more frequently. The trailhead couldn't be far now. My muscles screamed in protest, but primitive survival instinct drove me forward. Behind me, the creature's pursuit had taken on an almost playful quality, slowing when it could have closed the gap, speeding up when I found a burst of energy. Then I saw it. My truck, parked where I'd left it hours earlier. The normality of it, this machine of human civilization sitting placidly amid my terror, created a surreal contrast. 20 yards. 10. The creature's breathing was at my neck now, a fetid warmth against my skin. I broke through the tree line and stumbled out onto the gravel road where I'd left my truck. There wasn't a moment to waste. I slammed the door shut, fumbled the keys in the ignition, and peeled out of there like a man who had just seen his death staring back at him. Through the rearview mirror, I caught one final glimpse of the creature. It stood at the forest edge, making no attempt to pursue further. As I accelerated away, I swear it raised one elongated arm in what almost seemed like a farewell gesture. The drive back to the ranger station passed in a blur of adrenaline and terror. I took curves too fast, the truck fishtailing on gravel roads. Twice I nearly went into ditches. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my breathing came in ragged gasps. The radio crackled to life halfway back, Carl's voice asking for a status update. But I couldn't form coherent words to respond. When I reached the ranger station, I burst in and managed to blurt out what I'd seen. My supervisor, Carl, stared at me for a long moment before calmly standing up and grabbing the phone. He made a few calls while I sat there, trying to piece together the mess that was my mind. The coffee he pushed into my hand spilled over the edges as I tried to drink. Words tumbled out of me in a disorganized flood. The backpack, the scattered clothes, the dismembered body, and finally, the creature itself. As I spoke, I realized how it sounded. The ravings of a man who'd lost his grip on reality. "Ron," Carl said finally, his voice steady. "We're going to get a team out there right away, but I need you to try and calm down, think clearly. Was there any identification on the remains?" "No," I managed. "But Schreiber's ID was under the backpack. I think there might be more than one victim." The next few hours passed in a haze. I filled out incident reports, drew crude sketches of what I'd seen, handed over my camera with its undeveloped film. A paramedic checked me over, noting elevated blood pressure and minor lacerations from branches. Someone gave me a sedative that dulled the edges of my terror but did nothing to erase the image of those inhuman eyes. 2 hours later, there were state troopers, search and rescue teams, and more people with serious-looking faces than I'd ever seen in my life. They assembled quickly, efficiency born of practice, loading up vehicles with rescue gear and forensic equipment. I was asked to guide them back to the site, but my ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, and Carl insisted I stay behind. "Mark knows those trails almost as well as you do," he assured me. "They'll find whatever's out there." So I waited, dozing fitfully in the break room as the sedative worked through my system. Dreams came in violent flashes, running, blood, those eyes tracking me through endless trees. Each time I jolted awake, expecting to find myself back in that clearing. The search teams returned after dusk, their expressions a mixture of confusion and frustration. "We found the trailhead, followed your exact route based on the map you marked," the state police sergeant told me. But here's the thing. They didn't find anything. Not a trace of blood, no dismembered body, not even the torn clothes I'd seen along the trail. They took my report, but you could see it in their eyes. They thought I'd lost it out there. "There's no evidence of any disturbance in the area you described," the sergeant continued, his voice carefully neutral. "We combed a half-mile radius from each point you marked. No blood, no body parts, no unusual tracks." "That's impossible," I protested, struggling to my feet despite my injured ankle. "I took photos. I documented everything." Carl placed a restraining hand on my shoulder. "Ron, the film was exposed when they developed it. Every frame was black." A coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the evening chill. My notebook, then. I wrote down everything. The notebook was produced, my handwriting deteriorating into unreadable scrawls after the initial observations. The final pages contained nothing but jagged lines and repetitive circles, a script I had no memory of writing. The state police sergeant cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitman, how long have you been working in this region?" 8 months, I answered automatically. "Any history of hallucinations? Episodes of disorientation? Medication you might have forgotten to take?" The implication was clear. They thought I'd fabricated everything. Or worse, experienced some kind of psychotic break. I looked to Carl for support, but his expression had shifted to concerned professionalism. "Ron's been an exemplary ranger," he said carefully. "But the isolation up here can affect people differently. And there was the Schreiber disappearance last week. I'm not making this up." My voice rose sharply, echoing through the station. "There's something out there. Something hunting in these woods." The sergeant exchanged glances with Carl. "We'll maintain the search for Mr. Schreiber, of course, and we'll check the area again tomorrow in better light. For now, I suggest you get some rest, Mr. Whitman." They left me sitting there, the weight of their disbelief pressing down like a physical force. One of the younger rangers, Mark Isley, lingered behind. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I believe something happened out there. Maybe not exactly what you think you saw, but something." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Mark glanced toward the door to ensure we were alone. "Last month I was tracking a wounded moose near Pebble Lake. Found it dead, but not eaten. It was arranged, just like you described. Limbs positioned, organs separated. I reported it as a possible poaching, but what? The tracks around it weren't human or animal. At least, not any animal I've seen in 15 years of hunting these woods." He pressed a small object into my palm. "Found this there too. Never showed it to anyone else. It was a claw, 5 inches long, curved like a raptor's talon but thicker, heavier. The base where it would connect to flesh was jagged, as if it had been broken off rather than shed naturally. The material wasn't keratin or bone, but something that resembled weathered ivory with faint greenish striations." "What is this?" I whispered, though I already knew. Mark shook his head. "Don't know. Lab at the university might be able to tell you. Just be careful who you talk to about this, Ron. Some things people aren't ready to accept." He left me holding the claw, its weight insignificant yet somehow the heaviest thing I'd ever carried. That night, alone in my cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the settling structure, every whisper of wind through pine needles set my nerves jangling. I placed a kitchen knife beside my bed and wedged a chair under the doorknob. The claw sat on my nightstand, a physical reminder that I wasn't losing my mind. Dawn brought a semblance of rationality with its pale light. I examined the claw more carefully, noting its unnatural density and the way it seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. This was evidence, physical, tangible evidence that something unknown was stalking the peninsula. I called in sick, unable to face Carl's concerned scrutiny or the sidelong glances from colleagues who'd undoubtedly heard about my episode. Instead, I drove to Northern Michigan University in Marquette, where a former college roommate worked in the biology department. Alan Richter had always been unconventional, his brilliant mind constantly seeking mysteries at the fringes of established science. If anyone would approach this objectively, it would be him. "Fascinating," he murmured, turning the claw under his laboratory microscope. "The cellular structure is unlike anything in our comparative anatomy database." "Meaning what exactly?" I pressed. "Meaning," he said, looking up with excitement rather than fear, "this doesn't match any known terrestrial species. The closest analog would be certain deep-sea organisms that evolved in isolation. But even that's a stretch. Could it be a hoax? Something manufactured?" Alan shook his head. "No. The growth patterns here are organic, not fabricated. This grew on a living creature, Ron." He hesitated. "Where exactly did you find this?" I gave him an abridged version of events, omitting the more fantastical elements of my encounter. Alan listened intently, his scientific skepticism battling with obvious fascination. "I'd need to run more tests," he said finally. "DNA sequencing, composition analysis. It would take time, and I'd need to be discreet. This isn't exactly within my department's approved research parameters." "How long?" "A week, maybe 2. He carefully placed the claw in a specimen container. "In the meantime, I'd suggest you document everything. If there's an undiscovered species in the peninsula, we need data. Habitat, behavior patterns, physical characteristics." "You think I should go back out there?" The idea sent a chill through me. Alan's expression grew serious. "As a scientist, yes. As your friend? Stay the hell away from whatever this came from." I left the university with conflicted emotions, validation that I wasn't crazy, but deepening dread about what actually lurked in those woods. On the drive back to Whitefish Harbor, I made my decision. I quit the next day. I know what I saw, and I wasn't about to go back out there and pretend it was some hallucination or figment of my imagination. I've been a lot of things in my life, but crazy isn't one of them. Carl took my resignation with a mixture of disappointment and relief. Maybe it's for the best, he said, signing the paperwork without argument. This job isn't for everyone. It's not the job I'm leaving, I told him plainly. It's what's in those woods. His expression shifted subtly. Ron, I've been a ranger for 30 years. If there was something out there, then you either haven't seen it yet, or you're not telling me everything. I studied his face, looking for any sign of knowledge hidden behind professional concern. Carl held my gaze for a long moment before looking away. Be careful what you say to people, Ron. Reports like yours, they can follow you. I cleaned out my cabin that afternoon, packing 8 months of life into my old Chevy Impala. As I loaded the last box, Mark approached, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Did you get that thing analyzed? He asked quietly. It's not from any known animal, I confirmed. My friend's running more tests. Mark nodded as if this confirmed something. There's talk among the Ojibwe elders. They won't go near Dead Man's Creek, haven't for generations. They call it Winnebago's boundary. Meaning what? Meaning it's a place where their trickster spirit set a border between worlds. He handed me a folded piece of paper. This was in Schreiber's tent. Search team missed it, but I found it when we were packing up the evidence. It was a page torn from a journal, the handwriting increasingly frantic. Third night. The sounds are circling closer. Not animal. Something watching from the trees. Locals warned me, but I didn't listen. It mimics. God help me, it mimics. If anyone finds this, stay away from. The entry ended mid-sentence. There's more, Mark continued. 2 hikers went missing last year in the same area. Records show 5 disappearances in the past decade, all within 3 miles of that creek. Carl knows. The senior rangers all know. They just don't talk about it. Why not? Tourism. Funding. Take your pick. He shrugged helplessly. Plus, who'd believe it? You saw how the state police reacted. Some things, the world isn't ready to acknowledge. I drove south that evening watching the wilderness recede in my rearview mirror. With each mile, rational thought reasserted itself. Perhaps I had experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Perhaps the claw was from some obscure but mundane species. Perhaps Mark was feeding into my delusion with folklore and coincidences. But in the deepest part of night, alone in a motel room halfway to Chicago, I knew better. Those eyes had seen me, recognized me as something other than itself. And somewhere in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, it waited, patient as the ancient forest around it. I spent the next 3 months trying to rebuild my life in Chicago. Found a small apartment in Wicker Park, took a job at an outdoor equipment retailer, mundane work that required no confrontation with the inexplicable. I told friends and family I'd left the Ranger Service due to budget cuts. A lie easier to explain than the truth. Sleep came reluctantly, haunted by dreams of pursuing footfalls and vertical pupilled eyes. I'd wake gasping, certain something was crouched in the dark corners of my room. Rational daylight couldn't fully dispel these night terrors. They lingered like smoke, tainting everyday moments with irrational fear. Alan called in late October with results from his analysis of the claw. Ron, his voice crackled through poor cell reception. You need to come back up here. What I've found, it's not something I should discuss over the phone. Just tell me what it is, I insisted, unwilling to return north. A long pause. The DNA doesn't match anything in any database, not just our universities, but national and international catalogs. The cellular structure shows evidence of extreme adaptation to environmental pressures that don't exist in North America. And the carbon dating, what about it? The sample dates to approximately 8,000 years ago. That's impossible for organic material this well preserved, unless it's been fossilized, which this clearly hasn't been. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. You're saying it's prehistoric? I'm saying it shouldn't exist, Ron. Not here, not now. His voice dropped lower. There's something else. The university got an unexpected visit from federal officials yesterday. They were asking about unusual biological specimens recently submitted for analysis. Did you tell them? No. I've kept this off the books. But someone knows something, Ron, and they're looking for evidence. After ending the call, I sat in my apartment staring at nothing, the implications spiraling through my mind. Whatever I had encountered wasn't just an undiscovered species. It was something that should have vanished millennia ago. If it had ever existed in our world at all, I might have continued my self-imposed exile from the Upper Peninsula indefinitely, if not for what happened next. Carl called me about a week after I left. Said he didn't blame me for quitting, but that some of the rangers had been hearing strange noises out near Dead Man's Creek again. Said they'd found more things hanging from trees, items that didn't belong to any animals. His voice carried the weight of a man finally confronting something he'd long denied. 3 more hikers missing in the past month. Same area, same pattern, no traces, no bodies. The official story is still animal attacks or disorientation, but you know better. I finished for him. Mark showed me that claw before he disappeared. My blood ran cold. Mark's missing 4 days ago. Routine patrol near the creek. Radio transmission cut off mid-sentence. Carl's professional demeanor cracked slightly. He was talking about something moving parallel to him through the trees. Something too tall to be a bear. The conversation that followed laid bare the secret knowledge the senior rangers had harbored for decades. Disappearances dating back to the 1930s, all clustered around the same region. Search dogs refusing to track in certain areas. Electronic equipment failing systematically. The Ojibwe warnings that went unheeded. We've managed to keep it contained in reports, Carl admitted. Attributed incidents to wildlife, exposure, accident. But it's escalating, Ron. Whatever's out there is getting bolder, ranging further from its territory. What are you asking me to do? I already knew the answer, dreaded it. Come back. Help us hunt this thing. The desperation in his voice was palpable. You've seen it closer than anyone who's lived to tell about it. You know how it moves, how it thinks. It doesn't think like us, Carl. That's what makes it so dangerous. Exactly why we need you. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I found myself driving north again 2 days later. The peninsula was in full autumn glory, forests ablaze with color that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. I met Carl and a small team at a research outpost rather than the main ranger station. 5 senior rangers, 2 wildlife biologists, and a representative from the State Department of Natural Resources, who clearly hadn't been told the full story. Our official operation is tracking an aggressive predator, likely a rogue bear, Carl informed the group, maintaining the facade. Unofficially, he glanced at me. I laid out everything, the encounter, the evidence, Allen's analysis. The state representative scoffed openly until Carl produced a folder of previously unreleased reports, spanning decades. We're not dealing with any known predator, I concluded. We need to approach this understanding that conventional tactics may be useless. The plan that emerged was methodical. Grid searches in teams of 3, never alone, with constant radio contact. Advanced thermal imaging equipment borrowed from the forestry department. Motion-activated cameras positioned throughout the target area. If something was haunting these woods, we would document it, understand it, and if necessary, end it. We established base camp a safe distance from Dead Man's Creek. Close enough for daily operations, but far enough, we hoped, to be outside the creature's territory. The first 3 days yielded nothing beyond ordinary wildlife signs and the occasional equipment malfunction. Cameras failing mysteriously, batteries draining without explanation. On the 4th day, the southwestern team reported finding a tree where something had embedded dozens of small animal bones in a spiral pattern up the trunk, too high and too precise for human hands without equipment. That night, 2 rangers reported hearing something circling our camp, its footfalls matching the rhythm I'd described in my account. Day by day, evidence mounted. A deer carcass arranged with that same methodical precision. Deep footprints that appeared and disappeared as if the creature could phase in and out of solid ground. Brief thermal imaging captures of something unnaturally tall moving between trees. There one moment, gone the next. The state representative left on the 6th day, visibly shaken. Document everything, he instructed Carl. But this stays classified until we understand what we're dealing with. The public panic would be unmanageable. On the 8th day, we found Mark's ranger hat hanging from a branch near the creek, perfectly preserved despite the weeks of exposure. Beneath it lay a neat circle of unidentified bones, not human, not animal, arranged with the same terrible precision I'd witnessed before. That night, huddled around maps in the command tent, I voiced the theory that had been forming since my return. It's not hunting randomly, I said, marking the locations of all documented incidents. There's a pattern here, a boundary it's establishing. Every disappearance, every display, they form a perimeter around this central area. I circled a region approximately 2 miles in diameter, centered on a particularly dense section of old-growth forest. What's in there? One of the biologists asked. Carl unfolded a geological survey map. Nothing specific on our charts. Some limestone caves, a natural spring. The Ojibwe called it the sleeping place in their oldest records. I think it's defending territory, I continued. The displays aren't just kills, they're warnings, markers to establish boundaries. It only attacks when those boundaries are crossed. So we stay out of its territory, a ranger suggested. Mark it off limits, create some natural preserve designation. It's expanding, Carl countered, overlaying maps from different decades. The incident boundary has grown almost a quarter mile in each direction since the 1970s. At that rate, it will eventually reach populated areas. I finished grimly. The decision came reluctantly but unanimously. We needed to enter the Central Territory, find whatever lair or nest this creature called home, and end the threat permanently. A team of 6 would make the attempt. Carl, myself, 2 senior rangers with military backgrounds, and the biologists who would document everything. Dawn broke cold and clear on the day of our incursion. We armed ourselves as best we could. Hunting rifles, tranquilizer guns, flamethrowers borrowed from the fire management team. Each person carried emergency beacons, radios, and enough supplies to last 3 days if necessary. The forest grew denser as we approached the boundary, the trees older and more gnarled. Canopy so thick that perpetual twilight reigned below. Moss grew in unnatural patterns on north-facing trunks, forming symbols similar to those I'd seen carved into trees during my first encounter. 3 hours into our trek, all electronic equipment failed simultaneously. Radios, GPS units, even analog watches stopped. The air grew noticeably colder despite the mid-morning sun above the canopy. Sounds dampened as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "We're close," I whispered, though I couldn't have explained how I knew. The clearing appeared suddenly, as if the forest had parted like a curtain. Unlike the surrounding woods, this space was perfectly circular, perhaps 100 yards in diameter. No trees grew within it, only a carpet of moss interspersed with white mushrooms arranged in concentric rings. At the center stood a monolithic slab of black stone, easily 20 feet tall, its surface covered with petroglyphs of a style I'd never encountered. Curved symbols that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. "My God," one of the biologists breathed. "This isn't natural formation, this was constructed." "How old?" Carl asked, approaching the monolith cautiously. "Thousands of years at minimum. Predates any known Native American structures in this region." I felt a familiar prickling at the base of my skull, the sensation of being watched. "We need to leave, now." "But we just found it's here," I hissed, raising my rifle and scanning the tree line. They emerged simultaneously from all sides, not one creature but 5, identical to what I'd encountered months earlier. They moved with that same terrible fluidity, too tall, too thin, limbs extending beyond natural proportions. Their faces remained obscured by matted hair, but those eyes, those vertical poppled eyes, fixed on us with ancient intelligence. What followed will forever haunt my nightmares. The creatures didn't attack immediately, but began a slow, ritual movement around the clearing's perimeter. Each step precisely timed, each gesture mirroring the others, as if performing some primordial dance. The air grew thick with that metallic odor, making breathing difficult. Carl fired first, a shot that should have dropped any natural creature. The bullet passed through the nearest entity without effect, as if it were composed of dense fog rather than flesh. The creature didn't react, continuing its measured circuit. The biologists frantically documented everything, cameras flashing, voices shaking as they narrated observations into recorders that likely captured nothing. Then, as one, the creatures stopped. Their elongated heads tilted at identical angles, listening to something beyond human perception. The monolith at the clearing's center began to vibrate, a low hum building to a frequency that rattled teeth and blurred vision. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Carl's arm and pulling him toward our entry point. 2 rangers made it out behind us. The biologists weren't so fortunate. Their screams echoed briefly before cutting off with terrible finality. We didn't look back, crashing through underbrush with blind panic, the sounds of pursuit all around us, that rhythmic thumping keeping perfect time despite the chaotic terrain. How we escaped, I still can't fully explain. Perhaps the creatures allowed it, perhaps they wanted witnesses to carry their warning. We emerged from the deep forest as sunset painted the sky crimson, stumbling into the base camp where the remaining team waited with growing concern. The operation was officially terminated the following day. The explanation given to authorities involved an aggressive bear pack and unfortunate accidents. The families of the biologists received vague reports of research mishaps. The territory around Dead Man's Creek was quietly designated a restricted ecological research zone, closed to public access. I haven't been back to the Upper Peninsula since. As for whatever's out there, it's not my job to figure it out anymore. But I know it remains, patient as the centuries, guarding whatever ancient secret lies beneath that monolith. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights when the wind blows from the north, I swear I can hear that rhythmic thumping, matching perfectly the beating of my heart. A reminder that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed, some territories never meant for human understanding. If you find yourself in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, enjoy the breathtaking forests and pristine lakes. Take photographs, fish the clear streams, hike the marked trails. But if locals warn you about certain areas, if rangers suggest alternative routes, heed their advice. Some parts of the wilderness should remain wild. Some secrets kept buried in the dark earth of forgotten places. What waits in the deep woods has existed long before us and will remain long after we're gone. Its patience is geological, its purpose unknowable, and it remembers every face it has ever seen. The Bureau of Land Management's ranger station sat like an afterthought at the edge of the Kaibab National Forest, 23 miles from the nearest town. Most tourists never ventured this far beyond the Grand Canyon's designated trails and scenic lookouts. This was the true Arizona wilderness, rugged, unforgiving, and impossibly beautiful. I stood on the porch of my assigned cabin watching the sun sink behind the ponderosa pines. After 3 months, I still hadn't grown accustomed to the silence. In Chicago, there was always noise. Traffic, sirens, neighbors, life. Here, the silence had weight and presence. My grandfather, Ahiga Tsosi, would have appreciated this place. He was Diné, Navajo, and believed deeply in the power and spirit of the land. As a child, I'd spent summers with him near Window Rock, listening to stories that blended naturally with the landscape around us. He'd taught me to recognize which plants could heal and which could harm, how to track animals, and most importantly, how to respect the delicate balance between humans and nature. Nijon Yazi, the local superintendent, had said when I reported for duty. Your application was impressive. Masters in wildlife biology, extensive hiking experience, but this is a different world out here. He'd given me a long, appraising look. The Navajo name, is that yours? My mother's side, I'd answered. My father was white. He'd nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, you've got the traditional knowledge and the scientific training. That's a rare combination. What I hadn't mentioned in my interview was the mountain of student debt, the recent divorce, or the desperate need to escape the concrete maze of the city. The ranger position offered housing, purpose, and isolation, exactly what I needed to rebuild my life. The pay was modest, but living expenses were minimal. My cabin was rustic but comfortable. 1 bedroom, a small living space with a wood stove, a basic kitchen, and a bathroom with temperamental plumbing. The walls were decorated with maps of the forest and a few photos I'd brought from home. My grandfather smiled at me from a silver frame on the nightstand. My duties were straightforward: patrol designated trails, monitor wildlife, assist lost hikers, and enforce regulations. Most days passed without incident. I'd document flora and fauna, clean up occasional trash, and ensure campers properly extinguished their fires. The routine was predictable, comforting, until the night the screaming started. I was finishing notes on coyote sightings when a sound sliced through the darkness. Not quite human, not quite animal. A cold wave washed over me despite the summer heat. The rangers had briefed me about mountain lions, bears, even the occasional drug trafficker using remote trails. But no one had mentioned anything that could make such a sound. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. The land remembers. The Diné know this. Every rock, every tree holds stories. I reached for my phone, but of course there was no signal. The radio crackled with static when I tried to reach the main station. Protocol dictated I stay put and report in the morning. But something pulled at me, an obligation not just as a ranger but as someone whose blood connected to this land. Grabbing my pack, flashlight, and sidearm, I stepped into the night. The moon hung low and bloated, casting silver light across the forest floor. The pines stood sentinel, their shadows stretching like fingers across the ground. The scream came again, closer this time. It carried pain and hunger and something ancient. The rational part of my brain cataloged possibilities: injured animal, echo distortion, even a fellow ranger playing a tasteless prank. But deeper instincts whispered otherwise. My grandfather had stories about creatures that moved between worlds, beings that watched from the spaces between trees. As a scientist, I'd always interpreted these as metaphors, cultural explanations for natural phenomena. Now, with darkness pressing in and that sound reverberating through the trees, I wasn't so certain. I clicked on my flashlight and began to follow the sound, stepping carefully over exposed roots and loose rocks. The forest seemed to hold its breath around me. No insects chirped, no nocturnal creatures rustled in the underbrush, just silence and that terrible, beckoning cry. Dawn broke across the forest like a fever dream, pale light filtering through the canopy. I'd been tracking the source of the screams for hours, venturing far beyond my assigned patrol area. My training warned against this. Forest rangers who went off protocol often became the subjects of search parties themselves. Yet something compelled me forward, deeper into the ancient woodland. The ponderosis gave way to juniper and scrub oak as the elevation changed. I checked my GPS. I'd wandered nearly 7 miles from my cabin, into a section of forest marked on maps with a simple notation: unmapped terrain, cave systems. The screaming had stopped around midnight, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. Now, in the uncertain light of morning, the forest resumed its normal rhythms. Birds called, insects buzzed. A mule deer watched me warily from behind a thicket before bounding away. I paused to drink from my canteen and check my bearings. That's when I noticed the tracks. They resembled bear prints but were larger, much larger, and the stride was longer than any bear I'd documented. The impression was deep, indicating significant weight. 5 distinct toe marks, surrounded by a massive pad. I placed my hand inside one print. It dwarfed my spread fingers. Wildlife biology doesn't account for everything, my grandfather had once told me. Science puts names to things, but naming something doesn't mean you understand it. I photographed the tracks with my phone, though I knew the images would be met with skepticism back at headquarters. Something this size would have been documented, studied, classified. The Forest Service would attribute the prints to erosion, multiple overlapping animal tracks, or a hoax. Following the tracks led me to a rocky outcropping. The prints disappeared at the mouth of a cave partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Dark, cool air flowed from the opening like breath from a sleeping giant. My ranger training covered basic cave safety, but this system wasn't on any official maps. Entering without backup or proper equipment violated every protocol. Yet the scientist in me burned with curiosity, and something deeper, that connection to the land my grandfather had nurtured, pulled me forward. I switched on my flashlight and stepped into the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately. The beam of light revealed limestone walls slick with moisture, forming fantastic shapes through millennia of patient erosion. The passage narrowed, then widened into a chamber where stalactites hung like stone teeth from the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. The air smelled of mineral and must and something else, a musky, animal scent I couldn't identify. Sweeping my light across the chamber, I froze. The wall before me was covered with paintings, not modern graffiti, but ancient pigments in red, black, and white. Human figures with exaggerated limbs, deer and desert bighorn sheep. And something else, a towering figure, twice the height of the human forms, with elongated arms that reached toward the smaller figures. The artistry was sophisticated, the pigments vibrant despite their age. These weren't documented pictographs. I would have been briefed on their existence. Either this cave system had never been properly explored, or the paintings were more recent than they appeared. As I stepped closer to examine them, my boot crunched on something brittle. Looking down, I saw bones scattered across the cave floor. Deer, rabbit, coyote, and something larger. My light revealed a human skull, partially crushed, nestled among pine needles and dust. Protocol demanded I leave immediately, report the finding, and return with a forensic team. This was now a potential crime scene, but as I turned to go, my light caught movement at the edge of the chamber. Something massive shifting in the shadows. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the perfect darkness I heard breathing, not my own. Then a low rumbling sound that vibrated the very air around me. Not quite a growl, not quite speech, but something terribly in between. My grandfather's warnings about respecting boundaries between worlds suddenly seemed less like cultural metaphor and more like vital instruction. I fumbled for my sidearm. But what good would bullets do against something born of shadow and ancient belief? I backed away slowly, feeling my way along the damp wall, trying to remember the path to the entrance. A stone shifted under my foot, and I stumbled. The breathing drew closer. My hand found a narrow passage, not the way I'd entered, but perhaps another way out. I squeezed through, scraping skin from my shoulders, moving blindly through the darkness as the breathing and that terrible rumbling followed close behind. The passage twisted like a serpent, narrowing until I crawled on hands and knees, feeling my way through absolute darkness. The breathing behind me grew distant, then faded altogether. Still, I pushed forward, driven by blind instinct and the desperate hope of finding light. After what seemed like hours, my outstretched hand met empty air instead of stone. The passage opened into another chamber, this one vast enough that my labored breathing echoed. A faint illumination filtered from somewhere above, a natural skylight where the cave ceiling had partially collapsed. In that dim blue glow I wasn't alone. A man sat propped against the far wall, his clothes torn and filthy, his face haggard beneath a matted beard. He didn't react to my arrival, staring blankly at some middle distance. "Hello?" My voice sounded wrong in the cavernous space. "Sir, are you injured?" His head turned slowly, eyes finding mine with visible effort. "Ranger," he croaked, noticing my uniform. "You shouldn't have come." I approached cautiously, assessing his condition. Dehydrated, malnourished, but no obvious injuries. I offered my canteen, which he drank from greedily. "How long have you been down here?" I asked. "Days? Weeks?" He shook his head. "I was hiking, got turned around, found the cave entrance during a storm. Thought I'd wait it out, then couldn't find my way back." He gestured to a small pack beside him. "Rationed my supplies, but ran out 2 days ago. Or was it 3? His story made sense. Disoriented hikers seeking shelter was common enough. But something felt off. His gaze kept darting to the shadows, and he flinched at every echo. "We need to get you out of here," I said, helping him to his feet. "Can you walk? It won't let us leave." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It brought me here. Keeps me here." "What does?" "Did you see something?" His laugh was hollow, scraping against the stone walls. "Not clearly. Never clearly. Just glimpses, movement. But I hear it, and I feel it watching." The rational explanation was that dehydration and isolation had affected his mind. Cave environments could be disorienting, trigger hallucinations. As a ranger, I'd been trained to recognize signs of exposure and psychological distress. "My name is Nijoni," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm going to help you out of here." "What's your name?" "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Littleton. I'm a geology professor from Flagstaff." The name struck me. 3 months ago, during my orientation, rangers had mentioned a missing hiker, a professor who'd ventured into the forest alone and never returned. Search parties had found no trace. Most assumed he'd fallen into a ravine or become disoriented and wandered beyond the search perimeter. "People have been looking for you," I said. "Let's get you home." He shook his head violently. "It's not that simple. This place, it's not just a cave. The paintings, the artifacts, this was a sacred site. I documented everything before it found me." "Did you disturb anything? Remove artifacts?" Desecration of indigenous sites was both illegal and, according to my grandfather, dangerous in ways modern thinking dismissed. "I was careful," Marcus insisted, respectful. "But it didn't matter. Some places aren't meant for outsiders. The Havasupai knew. They warned about a guardian of the underground passages, a being that protected sacred spaces from intruders." His voice dropped. "They called it Soapitsi, the tall one." My skin prickled with recognition. My grandfather had spoken of similar beings in Navajo tradition. Yinoldushi, skinwalkers, and others that defied simple categorization. Creatures that stood in the threshold between the physical and spiritual worlds. "Let's focus on getting out," I said, pushing aside the growing unease. "Did you track your path at all?" Marcus gestured to a crude map scratched into the cave floor. "I tried. This chamber connects to 3 passages. That one," he pointed to where I'd emerged, "leads deeper into the system. The one opposite circles back to the main entrance, but that's where it waits. And the third narrows quickly, too small for an adult to pass through." I checked my compass, which spun uselessly. Underground, without landmarks or sky, navigation became nearly impossible. "We'll try for the main entrance," I decided. "Together." "What exactly did you see there?" Marcus's eyes filmed with tears. "Shadows shouldn't move against the light. Shadows shouldn't have mass and breath and hunger." He clutched my arm with surprising strength. "It doesn't kill quickly. The bones. There are so many bones, some of them recent." I thought of the skull I'd seen earlier. The crushed cranium. "We need to move," I said, helping him to his feet. "Stay close to me." We started toward the passage he'd indicated, the professor leaning heavily on my shoulder. The faint light from above dimmed as clouds passed over the opening, plunging us into momentary darkness. In that instant of blackness, something massive shifted at the mouth of our chosen passage. A sound like stone grinding against stone filled the chamber. When light returned seconds later, the passage entrance was empty. But deep scratches marked the limestone floor, fresh ones, leading into the darkness we were about to enter. "It knows we're trying to leave," Marcus whispered. I drew my sidearm, knowing how inadequate it would be against whatever awaited us, but finding cold comfort in its weight nonetheless. "We go together," I said. "Whatever's down here, we face it together." Marcus nodded, his expression settling into grim determination. The Havasupai stories say Tasapitsi can be appeased with offerings and proper respect. I've tried prayers, small gifts from my pack. Nothing worked. My grandfather's teaching surfaced in my memory. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "the only offering that matters is truth and humility." We stepped into the passage, moving slowly through the darkness toward whatever ancient force had claimed this underworld as its domain. The passage widened gradually, our footsteps echoing in hypnotic rhythm. Marcus stumbled frequently, his strength fading despite determination in his eyes. I supported his weight, feeling responsible for this stranger whose fate had become entangled with mine. "Tell me about your research," I said, hoping conversation would keep his mind focused. "I studied geological formations with cultural significance," he replied, voice rasping. "Indigenous peoples often recognize special properties in the land that science is only beginning to understand. Magnetic anomalies, natural acoustics, mineral compositions that affect perception. Is that what brought you to these caves?" He nodded weakly. Havasupai oral histories mentioned caves where the boundary between worlds thinned. I thought it was metaphorical, cultural interpretation of unusual geological features. A bitter laugh escaped him. I was wrong. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the last but with a ceiling high enough that our lights couldn't reach it. The air felt different here, charged, like the atmosphere before a monsoon storm. Patterns swirled across the walls, more pictographs, but with a frantic quality, as if painted in haste or terror. In the center of the chamber stood a stone formation resembling an altar, surrounded by arrangements of bones, feathers, and small carved effigies. Ancient offerings, undisturbed for centuries, except for one modern addition, a camera. High-end, dusty but intact. "Yours?" I asked Marcus. "I set it up to capture time-lapse footage," he admitted. After I started hearing things, I approached the camera cautiously. "Did you review the footage?" "The first few days. Nothing unusual, just normal cave shadows. Then the battery died. I was conserving my flashlight, so I couldn't spare the power to recharge it. I removed the memory card, pocketing it. If we made it out, that footage might provide answers, or at least evidence of what we were dealing with." As I stepped away from the altar, my foot struck something that skittered across the stone floor. Directing my light, I saw a small carved figure. Recent, not ancient, whittled from pine wood with a pocket knife. The craftsmanship was crude, but the subject unmistakable. A tall, disproportionate figure with elongated limbs, similar to the pictographs, but three-dimensional. "You made this?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "An offering. I thought if I showed respect." He trailed off. My grandfather would have understood immediately why this approach failed. The carving wasn't made with proper knowledge or authority. It was appropriation, not respect. A tourist's attempt at participation in spiritual practices he didn't understand. I set the carving back at the altar's base. "My grandfather was Diné, Navajo," I said quietly. "He taught me that sacred places have protocols. Entering sacred space requires preparation, proper intention, and often, invitation." "I had permission from the university," Marcus said defensively. "Not the same thing," I replied without judgment. "Academic permission isn't spiritual permission." Something shifted in the darkness above us, a sound like leather stretching. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath clouded in front of my face. "It's here," Marcus whispered. I raised my light toward the ceiling, revealing nothing but shadow and stone. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified, prickling across my skin. "We need to continue," I said, taking Marcus's arm. "Stay close." We moved toward the passage on the chamber's far side. The one Marcus believed led toward the main entrance. Every step felt weighted, as if moving through water. The air thickened with that musky scent I'd noticed earlier, now overwhelming. Halfway across the chamber, Marcus froze. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the wall. Our lights revealed a shadow where no shadow should be. A tall, impossibly thin silhouette that didn't match either of our forms. It moved independently, stretching across the pictographs, fingers elongating toward us. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Air currents affecting dust particles, light refraction, shared hallucination induced by cave gases. But none explained the deliberate movement, the sense of intelligence behind the shadow's advance. "Don't run," I said, keeping my voice steady. Sudden movements might trigger predatory instincts. "It's not a predator," Marcus hissed. "Not in the biological sense. It's a guardian. A threshold entity." The shadow continued its approach, now moving across the floor rather than the wall, defying normal physics. Where it passed, the air distorted like heat waves above summer asphalt. I remembered my grandfather's teachings about encountering spiritual entities. Show respect, speak truth, make no demands. Slowly I knelt, placing my hand palm down on the cool stone floor. "We acknowledge this is your place," I said, speaking firmly but respectfully. "I am Nizhoni Yazi. My blood carries the memory of these lands. This man sought knowledge, not desecration. We ask for safe passage." The shadow paused its advance. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the distant dripping water ceased. Then, a voice that wasn't a voice filled the space. Not sound waves through air, but meaning directly impressed upon consciousness. "Intent matters not. Consequence remains." Marcus collapsed beside me, hands covering his ears, though the communication hadn't used sound. "It's been saying that for days," he gasped. "I don't understand what it wants." The shadow approached again, now forming a more distinct shape. Vaguely humanoid, but with proportions that disturbed the eye. Where a face should be, there was only deeper darkness. The boundary weakens, your presence accelerates. Balance must be restored. Understanding dawned painfully. This wasn't about trespassing in the conventional sense. Something about human presence, perhaps our technology, our documenting, our rational frameworks, was damaging the spiritual properties of this place. How do we restore balance, I asked. The shadow entity extended an impossibly long arm toward the altar. What was taken must be returned. What was revealed must be concealed. Marcus's face drained of color. My research notes, he whispered. And I removed small samples, rock specimens, pigment scrapings for dating. I felt a surge of anger toward this academic who'd treated sacred space as a research opportunity. But anger wouldn't help us now. Where are the samples? I demanded. In my pack at the university. I sent them out before returning for more documentation. The shadow pulsed, darkness rippling through it like muscle contractions. Consequence remains. It moved with sudden speed, enveloping Marcus before I could react. His scream cut off abruptly as the darkness swallowed him. For a terrible moment, the shadow took on his dimensions, a dark mirror image of the professor. Then it resumed its original form, leaving no trace of Marcus. I raised my sidearm instinctively, though I knew bullets couldn't harm this entity. Balance requires exchange. The presence turned toward me. You understand the old ways. You may leave to fulfill the obligation. What obligation? My voice remained steady despite the terror coursing through me. Return what was taken. Seal what was opened. Or others will follow, and the boundary will fail. The shadow retreated, flowing up the wall and into a narrow crevice near the ceiling. The chamber's oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, though the sense of being watched remained. I was being offered a chance that Marcus hadn't received, perhaps because of my heritage, or my stated respect, or simply because the entity needed someone to complete its demand. The passage ahead lay open, the way back to the surface, if I chose to take it. But accepting meant acknowledging responsibility for recovering whatever samples Marcus had removed, and somehow sealing the cave. It meant accepting the reality of what I'd witnessed, something my scientific training resisted even as my cultural upbringing embraced it. I took a deep breath of the stale cave air and stepped forward, toward the surface and the obligation I now carried. 3 days after emerging from the cave system, I sat in my cabin reviewing the footage from Marcus's camera. My report to headquarters had been deliberately vague. I'd mentioned finding evidence of a missing hiker and discovering indigenous pictographs in an unmapped cave, but omitted the supernatural elements. They'd dispatched a search team who found nothing. No Marcus, no altar chamber, not even the passage I'd described. Geological shifts, the lead searcher had suggested. Cave systems can collapse or realign, especially after monsoon rains. I nodded, accepting their reality while knowing mine had become something different. The memory card had revealed little at first. Hours of still footage showing empty cave chambers, but reviewing it frame by frame had revealed momentary distortions, shadow movements that defied explanation. In the final recorded hours, something tall had passed before the camera, causing the image to blur and distort before clearing again. My satellite phone showed 7 missed calls from Northern Arizona University, where administrators were growing concerned about their missing professor. Soon they would demand answers I couldn't provide. A knock at my cabin door startled me. Visitors were rare at this remote outpost. Opening the door revealed an elderly Havasupai man, his weathered face solemn beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Ranger Yazzie?" he asked. "I am Raymond Siniela. May I come in?" I welcomed him, offering coffee which he accepted with a nod. "The Forest Service called our tribal council," he explained, "about caves and pictographs on the border of our ancestral territories. They mentioned your name as the discoverer." I studied him carefully. "The search team found nothing. They weren't meant to." Raymond sipped his coffee, just as Professor Littleton wasn't meant to document what he found. My pulse quickened. "You knew him?" He consulted with our cultural committee last spring. We advised against his expedition. Some knowledge isn't meant for academic papers and conference presentations. Outside, wind rustled through the ponderosas. A storm was building on the horizon, dark clouds gathering over distant mesas. "I saw something in those caves," I said carefully. Raymond nodded. "So Apitse, the tall one, guardian of boundaries." He gestured to the camera memory card on my table. "And now you possess evidence." "Not very convincing evidence," I admitted. "Shadows, distortions, nothing conclusive. Yet you know what you witnessed." I thought of Marcus disappearing into that impossible darkness. "Yes, our stories speak of thin places where worlds intersect," Raymond continued. "The beings who dwell there maintain separation between realms, When that separation weakens, you left the consequence unspoken. It said balance must be restored, I recalled. That what was taken must be returned. Raymond leaned forward. Professor Littleton removed physical samples, but more dangerously, he removed knowledge meant to remain hidden, sharing it with colleagues who lacked proper context and respect. His research notes, I realized. And the samples, yes. The university has both. His office contains the physical items. His cloud storage holds digital records. I set down my coffee cup. How do you know this? I served as cultural consultant on his grant proposal, Raymond replied simply. Before withdrawing, when I realized his true intentions, thunder rolled across the forest. The storm was approaching faster than natural weather patterns should allow. What happens if the balance isn't restored? I asked. Raymond's expression darkened. The boundary continues to weaken. The Guardian can maintain separation between worlds only to a point. Beyond that, he gestured to the gathering storm. Signs appear first in natural systems. Weather, animal behavior, geological activity. Then human consciousness becomes affected. I thought of the skull in the cave, the scattered bones. People die. Some deaths are merciful compared to other possibilities, Raymond said quietly. I understood then that I'd been chosen for a purpose, not just by the cave entity but by forces that operated beyond ordinary comprehension. My dual heritage, scientific training and spiritual understanding made me uniquely positioned to address this breach. I need to recover everything, I said. The physical samples, the research data. Raymond nodded, and then returned to the cave entrance, which only you can now find, to complete the restoration. The university won't just hand over a professor's research materials. No, Raymond agreed. They won't. The implication hung between us. Whatever action I took next would likely end my ranger career. Unauthorized removal of university property could result in criminal charges. But inaction carried consequences I now understood were far worse. My grandfather would say I have no choice, I said finally. Raymond smiled slightly. Your grandfather sounds wise. The Dine and Havesipai have different traditions, but we share understanding of responsibility to the land and the forces that dwell within it. He reached into his pocket and removed a small pouch, placing it on the table between us. Protective herbs, he explained. Burn them when you return to the cave entrance. They will strengthen your intention and signal respect. Will they protect me from the Guardian? That depends on your success in restoring what was taken, Raymond said, and on whether the Guardian believes balance can be maintained. After Raymond left, I sat watching the storm approach, making my decision. Tomorrow I would request emergency personal leave. By nightfall I'd be in Flagstaff, facing a different kind of darkness than the cave had held. I packed a small bag, including my ranger credentials which might grant me access to university buildings. The herbs Raymond had provided went into my pocket. As the first heavy raindrops struck my cabin roof, I loaded the memory card's contents onto my laptop, then deliberately crushed the original card under my boot heel. Some evidence needed to remain concealed, even from myself. The storm broke fully, rain hammering against the windows with unnatural force. Between thunderclaps, I could almost hear that voice again. Balance must be restored, not just for Marcus, not just for myself, but for the boundary between worlds that was wearing dangerously thin. The university campus stood quiet under autumn moonlight. Most buildings were dark, but lights still burned in the geology department, where late-working graduate students hunched over microscopes and computer screens. Using my ranger credentials and a story about cooperating on federal land management, I gained access to the main building. Finding Marcus's office proved simple. His name remained on the door, his disappearance too recent for institutional memory to have erased him. The lock yielded to a university master key borrowed from a sympathetic janitor who believed my story about retrieving personal items for a missing colleague's family. Inside, organized chaos told the story of a researcher's passionate mind. Maps covered one wall, sticky notes on another. Books stood in precarious stacks on every surface. And there, on a shelf behind his desk, sat a collection of labeled specimen containers, small rock samples, vials of pigment scrapings, soil samples. Each bore coordinates and dates. I checked them against my GPS records, confirming they matched the cave system's location. These physical items formed one part of what needed returning, but Raymond had mentioned digital records as well. Marcus's computer required a password, but academics are predictably bad at security. His password, Soapetsi1, was written on a sticky note hidden under his keyboard. His research files opened before me, hundreds of photographs documenting the cave paintings, 3D terrain mappings, chemical analyses of pigments dating the artwork to over 4,000 years ago. Most disturbing were his interpretations, connecting the pictographs to global mythologies about liminal beings and threshold guardians. "You went looking for confirmation?" I murmured to the absent professor, and found more than theory. I transferred the files to a portable drive, then systematically deleted them from university servers, including cloud backups. Next came his email, where I found messages to colleagues sharing preliminary findings. Those too needed addressing. I sent a final message from his account. Upon further analysis, my findings at the Kaibab site were compromised by contamination and misinterpretation. Please disregard previous communications regarding this research. All samples and data should be considered invalid. I apologize for any confusion. It wouldn't stop academic curiosity completely, but might slow further investigation until the restoration was complete. As I gathered the physical samples into my bag, a voice from the doorway froze me in place. "Finding anything interesting, Ranger Yazzie?" A woman stood there, mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes. Her ID badge identified her as Dr. Eleanor Weiss, department chair. "Dr. Weiss," I acknowledged, caught red-handed. "I can explain." "Can you?" She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. "Because from my perspective, it appears a federal employee is removing university property from a missing professor's office." I considered lies but settled on partial truth. These samples were removed from protected indigenous cultural sites without proper authorization. I'm retrieving them as part of my official duties. Her eyes narrowed. "If that were true, you'd have a warrant, not a janitor's key." She gestured to my bag. "Those samples and Marcus's research represent the last traces of a respected colleague who may never return. They might help us understand what happened to him." "They're why he disappeared," I said before I could stop myself. Dr. Weiss studied me with new interest. "You know something about Marcus's disappearance?" "I found evidence in the field," I admitted, "but not the kind that would make sense in a search report or police investigation." "Try me." She sat in Marcus's chair. "I've spent 40 years studying the intersection of geological formations and cultural beliefs. I've seen phenomena that defy conventional explanation." Something in her tone suggested an open mind, rare in academic circles. I took a chance. "The site Marcus was investigating is protected by something that defies scientific categorization, a guardian entity the Havasupai called Suapetsi. It took him because he removed artifacts and knowledge that were meant to remain hidden." I expected dismissal or concern for my mental health. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Marcus mentioned encountering unusual phenomena in his field notes. Shadow movements, sound anomalies. I thought it was isolation playing tricks on his senses." She gestured to the specimens. "And these must be returned to appease this guardian, along with all research data." "Yes." Dr. Weiss was silent for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "Academic integrity demands I protect these research materials, but human integrity?" She looked at a framed photo of herself and Marcus at a conference. "Will returning these items bring him back?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But it might prevent others from facing the same fate." Another long silence followed before she reached a decision. "Take them," she said finally. "I'll handle questions from the university. But I want something in return." "What?" "The truth, afterward. Whatever you can share about what really happened to Marcus. Not for publication, for closure." I nodded. "I'll tell you what I can." With university matters resolved, I drove back toward the forest, the samples secure in my vehicle. The storm that had begun days earlier still lingered, unnatural in its persistence. Lightning split the sky with increasing frequency as I approached the forest boundary. By dawn, I stood at the cave entrance again, exactly where I'd first discovered it. Despite the search team's failure to locate it, the opening remained visible to me, perhaps because I'd been marked by the Guardian, or because my dual heritage allowed me to perceive what others couldn't. I prepared as Raymond had instructed, burning the protective herbs in a small ceramic bowl. Their smoke carried a sharp, cleansing scent that cut through the petrichor of rain-soaked earth. The physical samples I arranged carefully at the cave entrance. Rock fragments, pigment scrapings, soil samples, all returned to the threshold of their origin. The digital drive containing the research files joined them. Standing at the cave entrance, I spoke words Raymond had taught me, an ancient Havasupai prayer requesting permission to approach sacred space. The storm quieted momentarily, as though the natural world paused to listen. I stepped into the darkness, my flashlight illuminating the familiar limestone passage. The path seemed to have rearranged itself, no longer requiring the long crawl through narrow tunnels. Instead, it led directly to the altar chamber where I'd last seen Marcus. The altar remained as before, surrounded by ancient offerings. I added Marcus's specimens and the digital drive containing his research, arranging them carefully at the base of the stone formation. "I've returned what was taken," I announced to the watching darkness. "Physical samples, digital knowledge, all of it. Now I ask for balance to be restored." Silence answered me. Then, gradually, a Familiar shadow formed on the far wall, stretching, elongating, taking that unsettling humanoid shape with disproportionate limbs. You have fulfilled part of the obligation. The impression formed directly in my mind rather than through sound. But knowledge cannot be unlearned. What was revealed remains revealed. I've deleted the digital files, I argued. Sent messages discrediting the findings in your mind. In others who read his words. The boundary has been compromised. The shadow moved across the wall until it loomed directly before me. A darkness deeper than absence of light. What more can I do? I asked. Tell me how to seal what was opened. A guardian is required. One who understands both worlds. One who can maintain the boundary. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. You want me to stay? To replace Marcus. Not replace. Succeed. Become. The shadow extended toward me. Not threatening but offering. I stepped back instinctively. I have a life above, I protested. Responsibilities, family, as did those who came before. Choice remains yours, but consequence awaits either path. My grandfather had spoken of sacred obligations that sometimes called people away from ordinary existence. Individuals chosen to serve as intermediaries between human communities and the more than human world. I'd always interpreted these as metaphorical roles. Medicine people, tribal leaders, knowledge keepers. Now I understood they could be much more literal. If I refuse? I asked, already knowing the answer. The boundary continues to weaken. What dwells beyond seeks entry. Many will suffer. The shadow shifted, revealing glimpses of a world beyond our own. Landscapes of impossible geometry, beings of unthinkable form, a reality where our natural laws meant nothing. And if I accept, what becomes of me? You remain yourself, yet more. Dwelling between worlds, neither fully in one nor the other. I thought of my small ranger cabin, my student loans, my divorce status, my tenuous connection to both my cultures. What truly anchored me to the world above, yet complete surrender felt wrong. My grandfather had taught that negotiation with spiritual forces was possible, that humans had agency even when dealing with powers beyond themselves. I propose an alternative, I said. I will serve as guardian, maintain the boundary, but I must be allowed time above, to settle my affairs, to visit my family, to feel the sun on my face. The shadow pulsed, considering. Terms are possible. The boundary requires constant vigilance, but not constant presence. Cycles may be observed, like moon phases, like seasons. 3 weeks below, 1 week above, I suggested. And safe passage for those who enter with proper respect and intention. Acceptable, if balance is maintained. But knowledge remains protected. None may document or remove what dwells here. I understand. The shadow approached again, extending what might have been a hand in human terms. The pact requires sealing. Blood of the guardian marks the boundary. I removed my knife, drawing it across my palm without hesitation. Blood welled, dripping onto the cave floor. The shadow touched it, darkness meeting vitality. Where they connected, a strange luminescence spread, neither light nor darkness but something between, marking a boundary now visible to my altered perception. The shadow enveloped me, not consuming as it had Marcus, but merging. Cold seeped into my bones, then warmth beyond physical sensation. My perception expanded. I could feel every passage in the cave system, sense every living creature that moved within it. The boundary between worlds became tangible to me, a membrane I could now monitor and maintain. When the shadow receded, I remained physically unchanged yet fundamentally altered. Knowledge filled me, of the guardian lineage stretching back thousands of years, of the delicate balance between realms, of the proper protocols governing interaction between them, and knowledge of Marcus, not consumed or destroyed, but transformed. His consciousness persisted within the cave system itself, his academic curiosity redirected toward understanding from within rather than documenting from without. He chose knowledge over return, the voice explained, now coming partly from within me. As many do, I nodded, understanding this might eventually become my fate as well. Complete merger with the guardian force, abandoning human form entirely, but not yet. For now, I would learn this new existence, this responsibility spanning worlds. I would honor my grandfather's teachings about respect for forces beyond human understanding, and I would return to the surface to settle my affairs, explain my extended absences, and prepare for a life divided between light and shadow. As I emerged from the cave into the forest clearing, the unnatural storm had cleared. Stars shone with renewed brilliance in the night sky. The air smelled clean, purified. At the ranger station, I would submit my resignation, citing personal reasons. Dr. Weiss would receive a carefully crafted explanation honoring my promise, while protecting sacred knowledge. My family would learn I had taken a position with limited communication capabilities, allowing for my periodic disappearances. The forest around me felt different now. More alive, more aware. I perceived layers of existence I'd previously only glimpsed through my grandfather's teachings. The boundary between worlds ran like a silver thread through everything, visible to my transformed senses. I placed my hand against a ponderosa pine, feeling its life force, its rootedness in both physical soil and something deeper. "We're not so different now," I whispered. Overhead, an owl called, 3 times, a sacred number, a sign of acknowledgement from the natural world. Recognizing its new guardian, I began the long walk back to my cabin, carrying ancient responsibility on my shoulders. The night embraced me, neither threatening nor comforting, simply acknowledging that I now belonged to both darkness and light, to science and spirit, to the seen world and the unseen. The boundary had found its guardian, and I had found my purpose. When I first took the job as a ranger at Olympic National Park, they warned me about a lot of things: sudden weather changes that could strand hikers, the dangers of hypothermia in the temperate rainforest, how to handle encounters with mountain lions or black bears. No one mentioned the possibility of something else watching from the dense undergrowth, something that shouldn't exist. I'd been a ranger for nearly 5 years, mostly working in more heavily trafficked parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone. Olympic was different. Over 1 million acres of wilderness, much of it remote and rarely visited. When the posting came up for the North Fork Ranger Station, I jumped at it. The cabin was isolated, positioned along the Quinaul River, surrounded by ancient cedars and spruces draped in moss. Perfect for someone like me who needed space after a divorce and too much time spent in crowded visitor centers. "You'll be responsible for the North Quadrant," my supervisor Dale explained during orientation. "It's a lot of ground to cover alone, but mostly maintenance and the occasional search and rescue. The station doesn't get much foot traffic except during peak summer months." "That's fine by me," I said. I could use the quiet. Dale studied me for a moment, hesitating. "Just keep your radio handy. Cell service is non-existent up there. And take reports seriously, even the strange ones." "Strange how?" He shrugged, suddenly interested in the paperwork in front of him. "Hikers get spooked, claim they see things. Probably just bears or their imagination running wild." I thought nothing of it at the time. Every park has its local legends, usually exaggerations meant to frighten campfire audiences or explanations for natural phenomena people don't understand. The cabin was rustic but comfortable. Solar panels for minimal electricity, a wood stove for heat, and a satellite radio for communication. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive. My first week passed in peaceful routine: trail maintenance, cataloging damage from the previous winter storms, and noting wildlife activity. Then came the first reported disappearance of the season. The call came over the radio on a Tuesday morning. A hiker hadn't returned to his campsite. His wife reported he'd gone for a short hike the previous afternoon and never came back. Search and rescue operations in the Olympics were difficult. The forest was dense, the terrain unforgiving. It wasn't unusual for people to get lost, but time was critical. I grabbed my pack, emergency supplies, and headed out to the coordinates provided. The couple had been camping near a small lake about 4 miles from my cabin. When I arrived, the woman, Sarah, was frantic. "He only went to collect more firewood," she explained, her voice breaking. "He wouldn't have gone far. Mike knows these woods." I jotted notes as she spoke. "Did he take anything with him? Water? A compass?" "Just his phone for pictures and a small pocket knife. He said he'd be back in 20 minutes. I radioed the situation to headquarters and began to search the immediate area. More rangers would arrive later, but for now, it was just me. The forest floor showed no obvious signs of disturbance, but I did find a clear boot print near the edge of their campsite heading northwest. Following the direction, I moved deeper into the forest. The trees grew thicker, blocking most of the sunlight. About half a mile in, I found a water bottle, the same brand Sarah had said they brought. "Mike," I called, pausing to listen for a response. Only the dripping of moisture from the canopy and the distant sound of a woodpecker answered. Then I noticed something strange. A clump of dark hair caught on a low-hanging branch. Too coarse for human hair, too long for a bear. I sealed it in a small evidence bag. As I moved deeper into the forest, the sensation of being watched intensified. I've spent my life in wilderness areas and know the feeling of animal eyes tracking movement. This was different, more focused, more intelligent. I found more footprints, then a disturbing sight. Deep gouges in the bark of several trees, about 8 feet off the ground, higher than a bear would mark. The trail of evidence led me to a small clearing where the ground had been disturbed. Signs of a struggle. Broken branches, scuffed earth. and something else, an overwhelming, musky odor that made my nose wrinkle. I knelt to examine what looked like a massive footprint pressed into the soft forest floor. My heart stuttered as I placed my hand beside it for scale. The impression was nearly twice the length of my hand, with 5 distinct toe impressions. As I took photos, a branch snapped somewhere in the forest behind me. I spun around, hand instinctively reaching for my sidearm. Nothing moved, but the silence was absolute. The birds had stopped singing. Even the insects had gone quiet. "Hello?" I called. "Mike, are you there?" From the darkness between the trees came a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite human. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Thompson. I've found signs of a possible incident. Requesting immediate backup at my coordinates." The radio crackled with static before Dale's voice came through. "Thompson, what kind of incident? Any sign of the missing hiker?" I stared at the massive footprint, unable to voice what I was thinking. "Possible wildlife involvement," I said instead. "I'm continuing to search, but something's not right here." As I ended the transmission, the feeling of being observed intensified. I scanned the tree line, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of something large moving in the shadows, something that stood on 2 legs. The search for Mike expanded with additional rangers arriving the next morning. By then, the strange footprints I'd found had been partially washed away by an overnight rainfall. The hair samples were sent to the lab, though I suspected they'd come back with an inconclusive or unknown candid result like so many others I'd heard about. Sarah was relocated to a ranger station near the park entrance while we continued our search. After 3 days with no sign of Mike beyond what I'd initially discovered, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. "What aren't you telling me about these woods?" I asked Dale when he visited my cabin to review the search grid. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the maps spread across the table. "What do you mean? Those marks on the trees? The footprint I found. Something unusual is going on here." Dale sighed, finally looking up. "Every ranger who's worked this section eventually reports something unusual. Officially, we document it as wildlife encounters, but unofficially, there's been stories about these woods for centuries. The local tribes have legends about a race of giant beings living in the deepest parts of the forest. They call them stick Indians or other names depending on the tribe." "Bigfoot," I said flatly. Dale winced at the term. "I'm not saying that's what it is, but whatever's out there, it's territorial and seems to react when people venture too far into certain areas." I thought about the strange sensation of being watched, the unnatural silence that had fallen in the forest. "You could have warned me. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was trying to haze the new ranger with campfire stories?" He had a point. I wouldn't have believed him. "Keep this between us," Dale continued. "The official report will list Mike as a missing hiker, presumed accident. But be careful out there, especially at night." After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I'd always been scientifically minded, believing only in what could be proven. But I'd also spent enough time in the wilderness to know there were things science hadn't fully explained. That night, I was awakened by a sound outside my cabin, a heavy thump against the wall, followed by what sounded like dragging. I grabbed my flashlight and sidearm, approaching the window cautiously. The forest was pitch black beyond the small radius of my cabin's solar lights. I saw nothing at first, then caught movement at the edge of the tree line, something large and dark, moving with surprising grace for its size. I stepped outside onto the porch, sweeping my flashlight across the yard. The beam caught a pair of eyes reflecting back, too high off the ground to be a bear or cougar, too large to be any known wildlife in the region. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. The eyes blinked once, then vanished. I heard heavy footfalls retreating into the forest, branches snapping under substantial weight. In the morning, I found 3 dead rabbits arranged in a row on my porch steps. Their necks had been broken cleanly, but they were otherwise untouched. Not killed for food. A message, perhaps, or a warning. More disturbing were the tracks in the soft earth around my cabin, the same massive, human-like footprints I'd found at the site of Mike's disappearance. I reported the incident to Dale via radio, choosing my words carefully. "Something left offerings at my cabin last night. And there are tracks." The radio was silent for a long moment before Dale responded. "Document everything, but don't pursue. I'm sending Ranger Martinez to stay with you for a few days." I was grateful for the company, but Martinez's arrival wouldn't be until the following day. I spent the morning photographing the tracks and storing the rabbits in a specimen freezer for later examination. That afternoon, I needed to check on a weather station about 2 miles from the cabin. Despite Dale's warning, I couldn't stay confined by fear. The hike should have been routine. I'd made it several times since my arrival. But today, the forest felt different, watchful and alive in a way that raised the hair on my arms. Halfway to the weather station, I found a tree with fresh claw marks, sap still oozing from the gouges. Above them, wedged in a crook about 9 feet up, was a small, bright object. I approached cautiously, circling the tree. When I realized what I was seeing, my blood went cold. It was Mike's phone. Climbing the tree was difficult, but I managed to retrieve it. The screen was cracked, but when I pressed the power button, it miraculously turned on. The battery showed 12% remaining. With trembling fingers, I opened the photo gallery. The most recent image had been taken 4 days ago, around the time Mike disappeared. I tapped it, and my breath caught. The photo was blurry, taken in haste, but it clearly showed a massive dark figure standing among the trees about 50 yards away. The creature was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with unnaturally long arms. I swiped to the next photo, even blurrier, as if taken while running. Just a glimpse of something large moving through the underbrush. The final photo made my heart hammer against my ribs. It showed a close-up of what could only be described as a face, not quite human, not quite animal. Deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow ridge, a broad, flattened nose, and a mouth set in what looked like a grimace or snarl. As I stared at the image, a twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around, nearly dropping the phone. Nothing was visible, but I could feel eyes on me. The same sensation I'd experienced the day I found the footprints. "I know you're there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. From somewhere in the dense undergrowth came a sound that will haunt me forever. A low, rumbling vocalization that started as something like a growl but modulated into what could almost be described as speech. Not words I could understand, but sounds made with clear intention. I backed away slowly, phone clutched in my hand, and began the fastest walk I could manage back to my cabin without breaking into a run. The entire way, I heard movement paralleling my path through the forest, always just out of sight. Martinez arrived the next morning, a seasoned ranger with 20 years of experience in the Olympics. He listened to my account without surprise, examining the photos on Mike's phone with a grim expression. "I've had 3 encounters myself over the years," he admitted, handing the phone back. "Never this close, though, and they've never left gifts before." "So you believe they exist?" I asked. Martinez shrugged. "I believe in what I've seen. Whether it's an undiscovered primate species or something else, I can't say. But the tribes around here have lived with these stories for thousands of years. They avoid certain valleys and ridges entirely. Why isn't this common knowledge? If there's evidence, evidence gets lost. Reports get buried. Anyone who pushes too hard finds themselves reassigned or discredited." He gave me a pointed look. "The Park Service doesn't want a Bigfoot circus, with every cryptid hunter and their camera trampling through protected wilderness." It made a twisted kind of sense, though it didn't explain why Dale had assigned me here without warning. That afternoon we received a radio call from the entrance station. A visitor was requesting to speak with the ranger who'd found Mike's phone. Dr. Eleanor Webb, identifying herself as a primatologist from the University of Washington. "Should we talk to her?" I asked Martinez. "Might as well. She's already got permission to be in the park for her research. Says she's studying Olympic marmot populations." He didn't sound convinced. Dr. Webb arrived at my cabin 2 hours later, a slight woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and intense blue eyes. She carried herself with the confidence of someone comfortable in wilderness settings. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said after introductions. "I understand you've had some unusual experiences recently. Who told you about the phone?" I asked. "I have contacts in the local police department. They mentioned a missing hiker case with interesting details." She set her backpack down. "I should be upfront with you. My official research focus is small mammals, but I've spent 20 years documenting evidence of non-human hominids in the Pacific Northwest." Martinez and I exchanged glances. "You're a Bigfoot hunter," he said flatly. Dr. Webb winced. "I prefer cryptid primatologist. But yes, essentially. The difference is, I approach this from a scientific perspective. No sensationalism, no television shows. Just methodical documentation and analysis." She reached into her pack and removed a thick file. "I've recorded over 30 encounters in this region alone, including several reports from rangers who've since been transferred or left the service." The file contained photographs of footprints similar to those I'd found, hair samples, and detailed witness accounts. Most compelling were several thermal imaging photos showing large bipedal heat signatures moving through forest environments. "What exactly are you suggesting these creatures are?" I asked. "Most likely a relict population of great apes that evolved alongside humans but remained isolated in remote wilderness regions," she replied. "They're highly intelligent, territorial, and appear to have complex social structures. The indigenous peoples have interacted with them for generations, maintaining a respectful distance. Martinez leaned forward. And what about the disappearances? Like our missing hiker? Dr. Webb's expression darkened. That's more complicated. These beings typically avoid humans, but there have been aggressive encounters, particularly when people enter certain areas they consider forbidden. It's rare, but not unprecedented. She turned to me. You said there were offerings left at your cabin? Dead rabbits? I nodded. That's unusual. In my research, such behavior typically indicates either a warning or... She hesitated. Or what? I prompted. Or communication. An attempt to establish some form of relationship. The three of us spent the evening reviewing evidence and sharing experiences. Dr. Webb asked permission to set up research equipment near my cabin. Audio recorders, motion-activated cameras, and thermal imaging devices. I can help you understand what you're dealing with, she explained, and possibly help find your missing hiker, if he's still alive. Against Martinez's reservations, I agreed. Something told me understanding this phenomenon was the only way to navigate my situation safely. That night, as we prepared for bed, strange calls echoed through the forest surrounding the cabin. Not quite animal, not quite human. A series of whoops and knocks that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. They're curious about us, Dr. Webb said quietly, activating her audio recorder. About why there are suddenly 3 humans in this territory. Martinez checked his sidearm. Let's hope curiosity is all it is. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed with Dr. Webb's arrival. The behavior patterns she described didn't match what I'd experienced. The offerings, the phone deliberately placed where I would find it. It felt more personal than territorial. As I drifted off to sleep, the calls from the forest grew closer. In my half-dreaming state, they almost seemed to form words, a language just beyond my comprehension. I woke abruptly at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps on my porch. Martinez was already up, his hand signaling me to remain quiet. Dr. Webb sat frozen in her sleeping bag, eyes wide. Something large moved outside the windows, its shadow passing across the glass. The wood of the porch creaked under significant weight. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A series of knocks against the cabin wall. Not random, but rhythmic. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps. Repeated precisely 3 times. It's trying to communicate, Dr. Webb whispered, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Before Martinez or I could stop her, she moved to the door and returned the knock pattern. The forest went suddenly, completely silent. Then something struck the door with enough force to rattle the frame. The impact against the door made us all jump. Martinez drew his sidearm, motioning for Dr. Webb to step back. I reached for the rifle I kept mounted above the fireplace, something I'd never thought I'd need to use. Don't, Dr. Webb hissed. If they wanted to break in, they could. That wasn't aggression, it was frustration. That thing nearly took the door off its hinges, Martinez replied, because we're not understanding. She moved toward the window, keeping low. They're highly intelligent. The knock pattern was deliberate communication. Against my better judgment, I joined her at the window. Outside, the moon had risen, casting silver light across the clearing around my cabin. At first I saw nothing, then a massive shadow detached itself from the tree line. The creature stood upright, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark hair. In the moonlight I could make out broad shoulders, long arms, and a distinctly non-human silhouette. It remained at the edge of the forest, watching the cabin. Dr. Webb fumbled with her thermal camera, capturing images through the window. Remarkable, she whispered. Adult male, judging by the size and shoulder width. The creature raised an arm clearly visible in the moonlight and made a sweeping gesture toward the forest. Then it repeated the knock pattern we'd heard earlier, striking a nearby tree with enough force that bark splintered. It wants us to follow, Dr. Webb said. Absolutely not, Martinez responded immediately. I couldn't tear my eyes from the figure. What if it knows something about Mike? Dr. Webb nodded. Indigenous stories often mention these beings taking people, sometimes returning them. If your hiker is still alive, the creature made the gesture again, more emphatically, before melting back into the darkness. We stay put until morning, Martinez insisted. Radio for backup. This isn't a National Geographic special. It's a potential threat situation. We maintained watch and shifts through the remainder of the night. By dawn, there had been no further visitations, though the strange call-and-response vocalizations continued from the surrounding forest, seemingly from multiple sources. At first light, we discovered new offerings on the porch. Not dead animals this time, but a collection of objects arranged in a precise line. A rusty pocket knife, a weathered compass, fragments of colored glass, and most disturbingly, a torn piece of fabric that matched the description of Mike's jacket. These are human objects, Dr. Webb noted, photographing the arrangement. Things they've collected or taken from people who entered their territory, or from people they've killed. Martinez added grimly. I picked up the compass with gloved hands. The glass was cracked, but the needle still moved. The manufacturer's mark on the back dated it to the 1970s. How many disappearances have there been in this section of the park? I asked. Martinez frowned. Officially, 2 or 3 per decade. Unofficially, more. Dr. Webb was examining the arrangement. This isn't random. They're mimicking human behavior they've observed. The straight line, the spacing between objects. It's deliberate. As we discussed the implications, my radio crackled to life. It was Dale. Thompson, we've got another situation. Family of 4 reported missing from the Cedar Creek campground. They were due to check in at the ranger station yesterday evening. My stomach dropped. Cedar Creek was less than 5 miles from my cabin, in the direction the creature had gestured. We're forming search teams now, Dale continued. Can you and Martinez begin checking the trails heading north from the campground? After acknowledging, I turned to the others. This changes things. It could be connected, Dr. Webb agreed. Martinez looked conflicted. I should report what we've seen. And say what? I challenged. That Bigfoot left us a message? They'll pull us from the search and send in rangers who don't know what they're dealing with. In the end, we reached a compromise. Martinez would join the official search team approaching from the south. Dr. Webb and I would investigate the northern area, following the direction indicated by the creature. We would maintain radio contact hourly. As we prepared our gear, Dr. Webb shared more of her research. There's a consistent pattern in credible encounters, she explained. These beings seem to have territories and social structures similar to great apes. They avoid humans generally, but take interest in certain individuals. Why me? I asked. She considered the question carefully. It could be random, or something about you specifically. Your role as a ranger, your behavior, even your scent. They have acute senses, much better than ours. We set out mid-morning, following game trails that led north from the cabin. I carried my service weapon, emergency supplies, and a satellite radio. Dr. Webb brought her research equipment, moving with surprising agility for her age. The forest grew denser as we progressed, the canopy blocking most of the sunlight. About 2 miles in, we began finding signs. Broken branches well above head height, distinctive footprints, and occasional markers that Dr. Webb identified as territorial signposts. Sticks arranged in X patterns or small stones stacked unnaturally. They're leaving us a trail, she said, excitement evident in her voice. I've never seen them this interactive before. I was less enthusiastic. Or they're leading us somewhere isolated. The trail took us deep into one of the most remote sections of the park, an old-growth forest that few hikers ever visited. The trees here were ancient, some predating European contact with North America. Around noon, we reached a small stream cutting through a ravine. As we stopped to refill our water bottles, I noticed something unnatural about a rocky outcropping on the opposite bank. A dark opening that appeared to be a cave entrance. Dr. Webb saw it too. Caves aren't common in this forest environment. As we watched, movement caught my eye. A small figure emerged briefly from the cave opening before ducking back inside. Not an adult like the creature we'd seen at the cabin, but something smaller. A juvenile, Dr. Webb whispered, raising her camera. This could be a family group. Before she could capture any images, a sound broke the silence. A human voice, calling weakly for help. I recognized it immediately. That's a child. Without hesitation, I splashed across the shallow stream, drawing my sidearm as I approached the cave. Dr. Webb followed close behind, her research forgotten in the moment of crisis. The cave entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, tall enough for me to enter without ducking. The interior was surprisingly deep, extending back into darkness. Hello? I called. Park Ranger, is anyone in here? A small voice answered from the shadows. Please help us, we can't get out. I switched on my flashlight, illuminating the interior. What I saw left me speechless. The cave opened into a larger chamber where 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children, sat huddled together. The missing family. They appeared physically unharmed but terrified. More shocking was what surrounded them. The cave walls were covered in crude drawings, handprints, stick figures, and more complex designs. Stone tools and animal bones lay scattered across the floor, along with more modern objects. Backpacks, camping equipment, even a rusted bicycle frame. And just visible in a shadowed alcove at the back of the cave was a crouched figure, smaller than the creature we'd seen at the cabin, but unmistakably similar. They won't let us leave, the father explained hurriedly as we approached. They haven't hurt us, but they block the entrance whenever we try to go. How many are there? I asked, keeping my voice calm while scanning the cave. At least 3 that we've seen, 2 large ones and the smaller one there. He nodded toward the alcove. Dr. Webb had gone completely still, staring at the juvenile being. Remarkable, she breathed. A family unit. We need to get these people out now, I said firmly. Radio Martinez and request immediate backup. As Dr. Webb reached for her radio, a low rumbling growl echoed through the cave. The juvenile creature retreated deeper into the alcove. From outside came the sound of heavy movement. They're coming back, the mother whispered, clutching her children closer. I positioned myself between the family and the cave entrance, weapon ready. Stay behind me. When I give the word, move quickly toward the stream. The light from the entrance dimmed as something large blocked the opening. I raised my flashlight, illuminating the silhouette of the creature we'd seen at the cabin. Behind it stood another, slightly smaller but still imposing. Dr. Webb stepped forward, ignoring my warning to stay back. We're not here to harm you, she said clearly, as if the creatures might understand English. We just want to help these people return home. To my astonishment, the larger creature made a series of gestures, deliberate movements of its hands that seemed almost like sign language. Dr. Webb responded with similar gestures. Primitive communication, she explained quickly. Based on what indigenous trackers have reported, the standoff continued for several tense minutes, with Dr. Webb attempting to communicate while I maintained my protective position. Finally, the creatures stepped aside from the entrance, though they remained watchful. They're letting us go, Dr. Webb said, sounding surprised. But they want something in return. What? I asked. She pointed to Mike's phone, which I'd kept in my pocket. That, and possibly you. What do you mean they want me? I demanded, keeping my voice low. Dr. Webb's expression was both fascinated and concerned. Not to harm you, I think. They're curious about you specifically. You've entered their territory repeatedly without showing aggression. You've accepted their offerings. In their perception, you've engaged in exchange rituals. The family huddled behind us, the children wide-eyed with fear. We need to get these people to safety, I insisted. Whatever these creatures want from me can wait. I handed Mike's phone to Dr. Webb. Give them this if they'll let us pass. I'll cover our retreat. She took the phone reluctantly. If I'm right about their intelligence level, they understand more than we think. Breaking faith now could make things worse. We don't have a choice. With careful movements, Dr. Webb approached the cave entrance, holding the phone out. The smaller of the two creatures reached for it with surprisingly dexterous fingers, examining it briefly before tucking it away somewhere in its thick fur. The larger one remained focused on me, its deep-set eyes unreadable in the shadows of its face. Go, I told the family, keeping my weapon pointed downward but ready. Move slowly toward the stream. Dr. Webb will lead you. As they edged past the creatures, I maintained eye contact with the larger one, trying to project calm authority. The beings made no move to stop the family, though the smaller one emitted a series of low vocalizations that raised the hair on my neck. When everyone was safely outside, I began backing toward the entrance, never turning my back. The larger creature suddenly moved, covering the distance between us with startling speed. Before I could raise my weapon, it reached past me to the cave wall, pressing its massive hand against one of the drawings, a crude depiction of what appeared to be humans and the creatures together. The message seemed clear, even without words. I'll come back, I said, not knowing if it understood. Alone. After they're safe. Whether by coincidence or comprehension, the creature stepped aside, allowing me to exit. Outside, Dr. Webb had already started leading the family toward the stream. I followed, constantly checking behind us. The creatures emerged from the cave but made no attempt to pursue, watching from the entrance as we crossed the water. What happened in there? Dr. Webb asked when we were a safe distance away. I think I made a promise, I replied. The family, the Hendersons, we learned, told their story as we hiked back toward established trails. They had been setting up camp when they first noticed strange movements in the surrounding forest. After dark, their tent was suddenly torn open, and they found themselves surrounded by the creatures. They didn't hurt us, Mr. Henderson explained. They just herded us through the forest to that cave. The children were terrified, but my wife noticed they were especially careful with them. Did they take anything from your campsite? Dr. Webb asked. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Our phones, a camera, some food. They're collecting technology, I realized. Things that capture images or make sounds. Dr. Webb's eyes lit with understanding. Of course. They're removing evidence of their existence. We radioed Martinez and the search team, coordinating a rendezvous point. I deliberately avoided mentioning the creatures in my transmission, referring only to the rescued family. As we neared the meeting location, Dr. Webb pulled me aside. What are you planning to do about your promise? She asked quietly. I don't know if it even understood me. It understood, she insisted. These beings have been evading human documentation for centuries while living alongside us. That requires intelligence. What would you suggest? That I go back alone to a cave with creatures that could tear me apart? Yes, she said simply. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. This could be an unprecedented opportunity for cross-species communication. The idea was absurd, dangerous, and yet I couldn't dismiss it entirely. My encounters had been different from the aggressive territorial behavior described in most Bigfoot accounts. There seemed to be purpose behind their actions. After connecting with the search team and ensuring the Henderson family received medical attention, I pulled Martinez aside to explain the full situation. You can't seriously be considering this, he said after I outlined Dr. Webb's suggestion. What if Mike is still alive? What if there are others? Martinez looked torn. At least wait for proper backup. We can assemble a team. And what? Tranquilize them? Treat them like animals? I shook my head. Dr. Webb believes they're intelligent beings. If I show up with an armed team, any trust will be destroyed. In the end, we compromised. I would return to the cave area the following morning. Martinez and Dr. Webb would observe from a concealed position with communication equipment and weapons if needed. If I didn't return by sundown, they would call in emergency extraction. That night, back at my cabin, the forest was unusually quiet. No vocalizations, no movement detected by Dr. Webb's equipment. It was as if the creatures were waiting. I slept fitfully, dreaming of dark shapes moving through trees and eyes watching from shadows. In one vivid sequence, I found myself in a forest clearing surrounded by the beings, trying desperately to understand what they were communicating with their gestures and sounds. Morning came with fog shrouding the forest. As we prepared to return to the cave, Dr. Webb provided last-minute coaching. Move slowly. Make no threatening gestures. If they offer something, accept it. Try to mirror their body language. She handed me a small recording device. Keep this running. Whatever happens, it's important to document. I still don't understand why they focused on me, I said. Dr. Webb studied me thoughtfully. In many indigenous traditions, certain people are believed to be able to bridge the gap between worlds. Someone who can see and be seen across boundaries. I'm just a park ranger. Perhaps that's enough. You protect their territory, in a way they understand. We set out in silence, retracing our path from the previous day. Martinez and Dr. Webb established their observation point about 200 yards from the cave, concealed in dense undergrowth with a clear line of sight to the entrance. I continued alone, heart pounding against my ribs. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching like fingers, shadows deepening despite the morning light. At the stream crossing, I paused, sensing movement in the trees ahead. A large shadow detached itself from the forest, the creature from the cabin, watching me from the opposite bank. I raised my empty hands, showing I carried no weapon. I came back, as promised. The being made a gesture, arm extended, palm up, then turned toward the cave, an invitation. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the stream, crossing to the other side. The creature turned and moved toward the cave, clearly expecting me to follow. I'm continuing to the cave, I spoke softly into the radio. The subject is present and appears non-aggressive. The cave entrance seemed darker than I remembered, a mouth opening into the unknown. The creature paused, looking back to ensure I was still following. As I stepped across the threshold, leaving the daylight behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing more than just a physical boundary. Inside, the cave appeared different. New drawings covered one wall, crude representations of what looked like my cabin, stick figures with long limbs, and something that disturbingly resembled a human with a ranger hat. The creature moved deeper into the cave, leading me to the chamber I'd seen before. There, arranged in the center of the space, was a collection of objects, phones, cameras, watches, all technology taken from various visitors to the forest over what must have been decades. Among them, I recognized Mike's backpack, and sitting against the far wall, thin but alive, was Mike. He looked up as I entered, his eyes widening in disbelief. Ranger Thompson? Is that really you? I rushed to his side, checking him for injuries. Besides being dehydrated and exhausted, he seemed relatively unharmed. We've been searching for you for days. What happened? They took me, he said, his voice hoarse. I was collecting firewood when I saw one watching me. I tried to take photos, then ran when it moved toward me. There were more of them. They surrounded me, brought me here. He glanced nervously at the creature standing at the cave entrance. They've been studying me, I think, taking my things, bringing me food and water. The larger creature made a rumbling sound, drawing my attention. It moved to the pile of technological objects, selecting Mike's phone. With surprising dexterity, it activated the screen, navigating to the photos. They're obsessed with the pictures I took, Mike explained. They keep looking at them, then at me, like they're trying to understand what the device does. The realization hit me. These beings understood that humans had technology that could prove their existence. They weren't just territorial, they were deliberately removing evidence. They've been taking people who photograph them, I said slowly. Not to harm them, but to confiscate the evidence. The creature made another sound, then pointed to Mike, then to me, then toward the cave entrance. The message seemed clear. I could take Mike and leave? Why now? I wondered aloud. Why let him go after keeping him for days? Mike looked between us. Can we discuss this philosophical question after we get out of here? I helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as he wobbled slightly. We're leaving now. My team is waiting outside. As we moved toward the entrance, the creature blocked our path momentarily. It reached out, touching the ranger badge on my uniform, then pointed to itself. Dr. Webb's voice came through in my earpiece. I think it's recognizing your role as a protector of the forest, similar to their own territorial behavior. I understand, I told the creature, tapping my badge. We protect the same land. This seemed to satisfy it. The being stepped aside, allowing us to pass. As we emerged into daylight, Mike squinted against the brightness. Martinez and Dr. Webb were already moving toward us, relief evident on their faces. Behind us, the creature remained in the shadow of the cave entrance, watching. Don't look back, I told Mike. Just keep moving toward the stream. As we crossed the water, I glanced back once. The creature had been joined by 2 others, including the smaller one I'd seen before. They stood silently at the cave entrance, a family group watching us retreat from their territory. Will they follow us? Mike asked nervously. I don't think so, I replied. They got what they wanted. Dr. Webb moved closer, her voice low. This is unprecedented. A peaceful interaction, a clear exchange. This changes everything we understand about these beings, or confirms what indigenous people have been saying for generations, I pointed out. Once we reached the observation point and Mike was safely seated, Martinez radioed for emergency medical evacuation. We were too deep in the wilderness for a ground extraction given Mike's condition. What will you include in your report? Martinez asked me privately. I looked back toward the distant cave, now invisible through the dense forest. The truth, that we found Mike in an abandoned mine shaft where he'd sought shelter after getting lost. And the creatures? I considered the question carefully. They've survived this long by remaining legends. Maybe that's how it should stay, at least for now. Dr. Webb overheard us. You can't be serious. This is the scientific discovery of the century. It's their forest, I said simply. They were here first. They deserve their privacy. Martinez nodded in agreement. The moment this gets out, their habitat would be overrun with curiosity seekers, hunters, media. They'd never know peace again. Dr. Webb looked conflicted. My entire career has been building toward proof like this, and now you have it, I replied. For yourself. Isn't that enough? A helicopter arrived an hour later, hovering above a small clearing half a mile from our position. As the medical team loaded Mike aboard, I heard distant vocalizations from the forest, the creatures communicating among themselves, or perhaps saying goodbye. Before boarding, Dr. Webb approached me. I'm keeping my research data, but I respect your decision. The Park Service has been covering this up for decades anyway. Not covering up, I corrected. Protecting. There's a difference. As the helicopter lifted off, I gazed down at the vast green canopy below. Somewhere in that ancient forest, intelligent beings watched and waited, as they had for centuries. I knew I would return to my cabin, continue my duties as a ranger, and keep the secret of what lived in the deepest parts of Olympic National Park. But I would never again feel alone in the wilderness. The forest had eyes, and now they knew me. 3 months passed. Summer brought the expected influx of tourists to Olympic National Park, keeping me busy with routine ranger duties. The Henderson family had stuck to our agreed story, that they had become disoriented and spent a night in the woods before being found by search teams. Mike similarly attributed his ordeal to becoming lost and taking shelter in an old mining tunnel. Dr. Webb remained in the park longer than planned, conducting her marmot research, while surreptitiously gathering more data on our forest inhabitants. She departed eventually with promises to keep their existence confidential, though I wondered how long her scientific curiosity would remain contained. My cabin felt different now. I'd grown accustomed to the sensation of being watched, no longer startled by occasional glimpses of large shapes moving through distant trees, or the found objects that sometimes appeared on my porch. Interesting stones, unusually shaped branches, once even a perfect eagle feather left precisely centered on my welcome mat. Dale never questioned my official report, though something in his eyes told me he suspected the truth. He did, however, approve my request to restrict certain remote areas from public access, citing sensitive ecological research. You seem different, he commented during one of his infrequent visits to my station. More at peace out here. I've found my place, I replied simply. On a warm August evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the forest canopy in gold. The familiar whooping calls echoed from the distant ridgeline, their evening communications. My radio crackled to life. "Thompson, you there? Got a report of unusual activity near Cedar Ridge. Probably nothing, but worth checking out." I smiled to myself. "I'll handle it. Probably just our forest friends." 10-4. Just don't make any new acquaintances out there. Gathering my gear, I headed into the deepening twilight. The path was familiar now, worn by my frequent patrols. As I walked, I sensed movement paralleling my route, a large shadow keeping pace through the trees. My watcher, my guardian. Or perhaps I was theirs. The mystery that had begun in fear had transformed into something else. A strange symbiosis between ranger and legend, human and cryptid, two species sharing the same ancient forest but living in different worlds. Sometimes, when the night is especially quiet, I hear knocking on my cabin wall, that same rhythmic pattern. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps. I always respond in kind. I've learned much about them in these months. They avoid fire and technology. They communicate through complex vocalizations and sign language. They leave territorial markers that, once you know what to look for, are obvious throughout the deep forest. They observe humans constantly but rarely reveal themselves, and they remember faces. Especially mine. Last week, a hiker reported seeing a bear standing on 2 legs near the restricted area. When I investigated, I found fresh footprints leading away from the trail, and the hiker's dropped camera with its memory card neatly removed. I smiled, knowing what had happened, and continued following the tracks. They led me to a small clearing where the memory card lay carefully placed on a flat stone. A gift, a sign of trust, an exchange. I left a ranger patch in its place, a symbol of my promise to protect not just the forest, but its most elusive inhabitants. That night, standing at the edge of my cabin, clearing under a star-filled sky, I called out to the darkness using the vocalizations I'd been practicing. A simple greeting, according to Dr. Webb's research. From the blackness between ancient trees came a response, deeper, more resonant than any human voice could produce. "I no longer fear the watcher in the woods. We guard the same wilderness, patrol the same boundaries, protect the same secrets." Sometimes, on my days off, I hike to the stream near the cave and sit quietly. Often, I'm joined by a large figure who keeps a respectful distance but seems to enjoy the companionable silence. We watch the water together, 2 sentient beings from different evolutionary paths sharing a moment of peace. The locals have started noticing something different about my section of the park. Fewer missing hikers, less vandalism, a sense of being gently turned away from certain areas by an inexplicable feeling of unease or disorientation. "That north quadrant feels spooky," one seasonal ranger commented. "Like something's watching you all the time." "Just the forest," I replied. "It's alive in its own way, more alive than they could possibly understand." Last night, I dreamed I was deep in the woods, surrounded by the creatures, not as an outsider, but as part of their circle. In the dream, I understood their language, their gestures, their ancient connection to this land. I woke to find fresh tracks in the soft earth around my cabin, a deliberate circle, as if something had been standing guard while I slept. My radio sits silent beside me now as I write this account. Soon it will crackle to life with routine park business, and I'll return to my official duties. But always, in the corner of my eye, I'll sense movement among the trees, a flicker of dark fur, the gleam of intelligent eyes watching from shadow. The legends were always true. The forest has guardians older than human memory, more patient than our brief civilization. They were here before us, and if we're wise enough to protect their secrets, they'll remain long after we're gone. I am Ranger Thompson of Olympic National Park, assigned to the North Quadrant. My jurisdiction includes 1 million acres of pristine wilderness, dozens of hiking trails, multiple waterways, countless wildlife species, and a family of Sasquatch who know me by name. Every evening, as darkness claims the forest, I stand on my porch and call out to my watcher with 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow taps against the wooden railing. The answer always comes, echoing from the ancient trees. I am never alone in these woods, and neither are you. I had been a park ranger for over a decade now, ever since I left the reservation as a young man determined to make something of myself. Being out here in the untamed wilderness of the Pacific Northwest suited me. I loved the solitude, the self-reliance it required, and I took pride in helping protect these sacred lands and guiding those who wandered into her mysterious depths. My name is Sequoia, like the majestic trees that have stood sentinel over these forests since long before my ancestors first set foot on this continent. My grandmother gave me the name, saying I would grow to be as tall and strong as the mighty sequoias. Well, I had the height part down at least, though I was rangy where the trees were thick and solid. I was several miles into the backcountry when the radio at my hip crackled to life. "Sequoia, come in." It was Jenna, the lead ranger back at HQ. I unclipped the radio and held it to my mouth. "Go ahead, Jenna, what's up?" "We just got a call about an overdue hiker near Deception Pass. College kid, went out solo 2 days ago and hasn't checked back in. Parents are worried sick. Can you head over and take a look?" I sighed. "Sure thing. Any idea what trail he was planning to take?" "We get a handful of these every season, inexperienced hikers biting off more than they can chew. His backcountry permit has him going up the Tall Trees Trail, and then off-trail from there, but no clear destination listed. I'll send a copy to your GPS." "Got it, thanks, I'm on my way." I clipped the radio back on my belt and adjusted my pack. Looks like it was going to be a long day. By the time I reached the Tall Trees trailhead, the drizzle had turned to a steady rain. I zipped up my dark green ranger jacket and pulled my hat down tighter. The parking lot was empty, not surprising given the weather. I set off up the muddy trail at a brisk pace. The rushing sound of the swollen creek accompanied my footsteps. About 2 miles in, I found it. A narrow, overgrown path splitting off from the main trail, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. This must be where the missing hiker, Jake Hansen, according to the info Jenna sent, had diverged from his planned route. I plunged into the underbrush, following the faint trail as it wound through sword ferns and huckleberry bushes. The trees grew denser, blocking out much of the gray light and casting everything in deep shadow. An uneasy feeling crept over me, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. I knew these woods about as well as anyone, but something felt off. The normal sounds of the forest seemed muted, hushed. An expectant silence hung in the damp air. I hiked onward, scanning for any clue of the lost hiker. A snapped branch, a muddy boot print, a discarded candy bar wrapper. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, I found no trace. My sense of disquiet grew. The shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision, taunting me. I shook my head and pressed on, and then I saw it. A scrap of bright blue fabric caught on a blackberry bush, fluttering in the breeze. I crouched down for a closer look. It was a torn piece of a lightweight rain jacket, the kind an unprepared day hiker might wear. Had to be Jake's. My heart quickened. I searched the area, eyes roving over the damp earth. There, a faint impression of a hiking boot in the mud. I followed the tracks as they veered off the faint trail, deeper into the trackless wilderness. The boot prints grew harder to follow as I pushed through the tangled understory, sword ferns and Oregon grape grabbing at my legs. The canopy blocked out the weak sunlight, casting everything in an eerie green dimness. My breathing sounded overly loud in my ears. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, my hand dropping to the bear spray on my belt. But there was nothing there, just mossy tree trunks and swaying fern fronds. I took a deep breath, tried to slow my racing pulse. "Get a hold of yourself, Sequoia." I'd always prided myself on being at home in the woods, attuned to her rhythms and secrets. But something about these woods today felt unsettling, unfamiliar, like I was an intruder in my own backyard. The muddy tracks continued to wind through the underbrush, crossing the same stream multiple times. Was Jake lost, disoriented, or frantically fleeing from something? The thought sent a chill down my spine despite my Gore-Tex jacket. I quickened my pace. As I clambered up a steep embankment, a red flash caught my eye. I pushed aside a huckleberry bush for a better look, and my stomach clenched. Smeared across a granite boulder was a dark red stain. Blood. I swallowed hard. There wasn't much, but still. In all my years of rangering, I'd never seen a trace of blood in these woods that didn't come from me or another ranger. Animals tend to hunker down and hide when injured, not leave a neon sign. I pulled out my GPS unit and marked a waypoint at the blood stain. Better record this in case, well, just in case. I glanced at the coordinates. I had hiked miles from the trail at this point, far off the beaten path. Not a place you'd expect a casual day hiker to end up. "Jake, what the hell were you doing out here?" I was so absorbed in studying the bloodstain that, at first, I didn't register the sound. A low, guttural vocalization, halfway between a growl and a moan. By the time my brain processed it, the noise had faded back into silence. It seemed to have come from a dense stand of Douglas fir trees ahead. "Hello? Jake?" I called out. "This is Ranger Sequoia with the Park Service. Are you hurt?" My voice sounded small, swallowed up by the vastness of the forest. No response. I unholstered my bear spray and held it at the ready as I crept forward, scanning the gloom between the trees. I knew the local black bears were more likely to run from a human than confront one, but an injured bear, or a sow with cubs, could be unpredictable. And then there were the more reclusive creatures that roamed these woods, the ones that didn't end up on the postcards they sold in the park gift shop. Cougars, bobcats, wolves. I was a dozen yards from the trees when the stench hit me. A noxious mix of rotting flesh, musky fur, and something else, an acrid tang I couldn't place. It was like a physical blow. I gagged, covering my mouth and nose with my bandana. I'd come across dead animals before, of course, but this was different. Worse, fighting back the urge to vomit, I approached the tree line. Forced myself to look into the shadows between the trunks. At first I saw only darkness. Then my eyes adjusted, picked out the details. Broken branches, torn earth, clumps of matted brown fur. And there, half hidden under the fronds of a decaying log, a hiking boot, attached to a human foot. Oh God. No, no, no. I rushed forward, crashed to my knees next to the grisly scene. Urgently brushed away the leaves and needles. Please don't be dead. Please don't be. It was Jake. What was left of him? His body had been savagely mutilated, clothes shredded, flesh torn, limbs bent at unnatural angles. His youthful face was frozen in a rictus of terror, mouth stretched wide in an eternal silent scream. Clouded eyes stared blankly at the canopy above. I reeled back from the gruesome sight, clamping a hand over my mouth. Hot bile seared my throat. In an instant, all my ranger training, all my outdoor experience, drained away, leaving me just another frightened human alone in the woods with an unspeakable horror. But I wasn't alone. That sickening other smell hit me again, complex and alien, and underneath the grunt of my own labored breathing I heard it, that eerie, guttural moan. Closer this time, hungry. My head snapped up, eyes wide. There, in the gloom between the trees, was that a flicker of movement? A shadow within shadow? I blinked rapidly, trying to focus. A dark shape detached itself from the tree line, took a lumbering step forward. Even with panic screaming in my head, some part of my brain registered the impossible size of the thing, the bulk of it, larger than any bear, taller than the tallest man. No, it couldn't be. That was just a campfire story, a legend. The creature took another step, and the pre-evening light filtering through the canopy fell across its face. Black, glittering eyes bored into mine, devoid of mercy or reason. A ferocious, alien intelligence. That maw opened, revealing jagged teeth flecked with red. And I knew that the same bloody end that had befallen Jake now awaited me. I was looking into the eyes of a myth made terribly flesh. Bigfoot was real, and it was here, in the shadow-haunted depths of my forest. Heaven help me. A wordless bellow erupted from that nightmarish face, a sound of pure primal bloodlust, and the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed. I scrambled backward, still on my knees, ripping my bear spray from its holster. There was no time to aim. I fired wildly in the direction of the charging beast, a torrent of capsaicin solution spraying out in front of me, the acrid stench of the spray mixed with the meaty reek rolling off the predator. It came on, heedless, smashing through huckleberry bushes, a dark avalanche of matted fur and corded muscle. The spray did nothing. Why would it? This was no mere animal. It was a force of nature, unstoppable. I lurched to my feet, turned to flee, but a gnarled tree root snared my boot. I crashed face first into the damp earth, felt a blast of pain as my nose crumpled against a rock. Hot blood gushed down my chin. The creature's roar sounded again, so loud it made my skull vibrate. I rolled onto my back, knowing it was already too late. I was going to die, just like Jake, ripped apart by an impossible beast that shouldn't exist. The creature towered over me, close enough now that I could feel the stinking heat of its breath, count the burrs tangled in its shaggy fur. See the madness swirling in those depthless black eyes. It raised one furred hand tipped with jagged yellow claws, lips peeling back in a snarl. "Wait!" I screamed, throwing my hands up in a futile gesture of supplication. To my astonishment, the beast hesitated, claws still poised to eviscerate. "Please," I panted. "Please don't." I knew it was insane to plead for my life to an animal, to a monster, but I was out of options. Those glittering eyes bored into mine, and for a surreal moment I had the uncanny sense that the creature was considering, weighing my worth. The seconds stretched out, my ragged breathing the only sound. Even the ubiquitous forest birds had gone deathly silent, as if the whole world were holding its breath. Finally, achingly slowly, the huge hand lowered, the snarl fading. The creature rocked back on its haunches and let out a low, warbling grunt, almost a sigh. And though no human throat made the noise, I could have sworn I heard a tinge of resignation in the sound, as if the creature was thinking, "Not this one, not yet." The moment passed, and the beast turned, lumbering back into the gloom of the forest as suddenly as it had appeared. I lay there in the dirt, legs splayed, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. Adrenaline sang in my veins. I'd never been so terrified, yet so profoundly relieved. It had spared me. Why? Gingerly, I rolled to my hands and knees, groaning at the hot pulse of pain in my battered nose. I swiped at the blood crusting my lip with the back of a shaking hand and staggered to my feet. My knees threatened to buckle, but I locked them out of sheer stubbornness. I wasn't going to fall again in front of it. I limped over to where Jake's mutilated body lay sprawled in the underbrush. Without the immediate threat of the creature, I could only now truly process the horror of his death. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't let them fall. There would be time for grieving later. Right now, I had to figure out what the hell to do. I couldn't just leave him here, abandoned like so much carrion. He deserved better than that. But the thought of touching his mangled corpse, stuffing it into a body bag, my stomach heaved and I swallowed a rush of bile. Radio. I needed to radio this in, let search and rescue handle the recovery. My trembling fingers fumbled the walkie-talkie off my belt. I mashed the talk button. Dispatch, this is Sequoia, over. I was amazed at how calm my voice sounded, belying the jackhammer pounding of my heart. A hiss of static was my only answer. Of course, the narrow valleys and towering evergreens blocked the signal out here. I'd have to hike until I reached a clearer transmission point, but that would mean leaving Jake alone out here, with it still prowling out there in the trees somewhere, doing God knows what. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to think, to plan. Finally, I crouched next to Jake's body, careful not to look too closely at what had been done to him. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry, but I have to go for help. I promise I'll come back for you. I won't let that thing violate you further. You'll get home to your family. I swear it. Haltingly, I backed away from his corpse. Even though I knew he was beyond caring, it still felt wrong turning my back on his pitiful remains. Like a betrayal. Like cowardice. But I clenched my jaw and limped off in the direction of the tall trees trail, the most expedient route back to the ranger station. Back to civilization. And if I took some grim satisfaction in placing more distance between myself and the creature with each painful step, well, could you blame me? The hike back was a blur of labored breathing and shifting shadows that made me flinch. My nose had clotted, but every exhalation reopened the wound, and I had to keep mopping at the slow seep of blood with my sleeve. I'd been hurt worse before, but that wasn't what made each stride an effort of will. It was the knowledge, crystallized with terrifying clarity, of what else stalked these forests, of just what I was sharing this lonely stretch of trail with. After what felt like hours, I reached a small outcropping of rock that I knew from experience boosted walkie-talkie reception. I slumped against a gnarled madrone tree, so weary I no longer cared that its peeling red bark would stain my uniform, and unclipped the radio again. Dispatch, dispatch, this is Sequoia, over, I said, hating the tremor in my voice. This time, Jenna's voice crackled back, laced with static but wonderfully, heart-wrenchingly human. Sequoia, where have you been? You were due to check in over an hour ago. What's your status? Did you find the missing hiker? I swallowed, suddenly realizing I had no inkling how to even begin to explain what had transpired out there. The creature that shouldn't exist. Jake's unfathomable demise. Who would believe me? I could scarcely believe it myself, and I've never been prone to flights of fantasy. I found a body, I finally managed. It's bad, Jenna, really bad. I need search and rescue out here ASAP. God, Jenna breathed. A burst of static, then, Okay, stay calm. Can you secure the scene? What's your exact location? I rattled off my coordinates as I dug in my pack for the emergency blanket I always carried. As much as it sickened me, I would use it to cover Jake's pitiful remains until help arrived. It was the barest minimum of decency I could offer him now. Okay, got it, Jenna said after I recited the string of numbers that would lead search and rescue to this nightmare. Now, Sequoia, I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm going to dispatch SAR to your location, but I need you to stay put, okay? Secure the scene as best you can, but don't put yourself at any further risk. The cavalry is coming. I almost laughed at that, a bitter bark. The cavalry. As if an entire company of armed men would stand a chance against the monster in the trees. But what else could I say? That there was an ancient, mythic evil stalking this forest that would rip them limb from limb the moment they set foot off the trail? That their guns and gear would be less than useless against fang and claw and primal fury made flesh? No. Let SAR come. Let them see what I've seen, and then maybe I wouldn't feel so alone in this new horrifying reality that had swallowed me whole. I copy, I said woodenly into the radio. Securing scene. Awaiting backup. Good, Jenna said, obvious relief bleeding through the static. Now, is there anything else I should know? Anything unusual about the scene? I hesitated, staring out into the shadowed tangle of underbrush and tree trunks, wondering if it was out there even now, watching, waiting. But what would I even say? How could I possibly convey the full scope of the horror without sounding like I'd utterly lost my mind? Which maybe I had. Maybe that was the only sane response to seeing the world crack open and reveal the hungry darkness grinning on the other side. No, I lied, hating myself for it even as the words left my numb lips. No, nothing unusual. Just a dead body. A dead kid. Static hissed across the channel and I thought for a second Jenna would press me, call me on my withheld truths. But all she said was, "Roger that. Take care of yourself, Sequoia. Help is on the way." The radio went silent and I was alone again with the trees and the blood and the spoor of the beast. I shuddered, the emergency blanket clenched in one white-knuckled fist, and forced my leaden feet to stumble back in the direction of Jake, of what little was left of him to keep vigil over. But with every step, it grew in my mind, taking up more space, blotting out thought and reason with those pitiless black eyes until all that remained was a single thudding imperative. Run. Hide. Survive. Because deep in the black marrow of my bones I knew this was only the beginning. I had looked into the abyss, and now the abyss looked back, patient and hungry, waiting for night to fall. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness as I crouched next to Jake's shrouded form, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sending my heart into my throat. The creeping shadows of evening gathered between the trees, pooling in every hollow, poised to swallow me at the slightest misstep. And underneath the rising chorus of birdsong and insect chatter heralding the onrushing night, I could feel it watching with that same implacable patience, like it had all the time in the world to claim me. And Jake had been merely the appetizer. I checked my watch compulsively, movements jerky with agitation. What the hell was taking SAR so long? They should have been here by now. Unless they couldn't find me, or something had found them first. The grisly possibilities chased themselves around my brain until I stood abruptly, no longer able to bear my own spiraling thoughts. To hell with protocol and procedure. To hell with Jenna's well-meaning but useless edict to stay put. I had to move or I'd go mad. "I'm sorry," I told Jake's pitiful bundle, voice cracking. "But I have to try to reach the trailhead, flag down SAR when they come. I won't be far, okay? I won't leave you." I didn't let myself dwell on whether I was trying to reassure a dead boy or my own splintering psyche. Instead, I gripped my billy club tight enough that my knuckles stood out white against my brown skin and set off at a limping trot toward the thin ribbon of trail that meant safety. Sanity. Bracketing ferns slapped at my legs as I crashed through the undergrowth with far less stealth than my usual woodcraft allowed. To my jumping nerves, each susurration of vegetation was the predator's claws reaching out to drag me down into foul oblivion. But I didn't slow. Couldn't. If I stayed still for even a moment, I feared I might simply shatter, reduced to so many bloody, whimpering shards in the loam. And then, between one crashing step and the next, the creatures fell on me. One moment I was fighting my way through the thicket, heart thudding wildly against my ribs, an invocation to my ancestors, a desperate prayer on my cracked lips. The next, a huge, hairy mass slammed into me from the side, sending me sprawling. The billy club flew from my grip, swallowed instantly by the clawing underbrush. The breath whooshed from my lungs in a choking rush, and for a terrifying moment I couldn't seem to draw in more past the stabbing pain in my ribs. My skull bounced off a clump of roots and a galaxy of sparks swirled in my vision. I blinked hard, fighting to clear them, to bring the hulking shape pinning me to the ground into focus. But it wasn't the creature. Not the same one, anyway. The thing on top of me was slimmer, almost gangly, its misshapen body covered in matted brown fur sticky with sap and old blood. It reeked like a slaughterhouse floor, the meaty stench so thick I could taste it coating my tongue. But even through the pain and panic and roiling nausea, I could see that its frame was that of a man stretched and twisted far beyond the boundaries of nature. A grotesque parody of human form sculpted by some mad god. Spittle-filled jowls snapped mere inches from my face, revealing a mangled slash of jagged fangs and nubs of shattered teeth. Its eyes were wild, rolling, but undeniably human. Or they had been once, before the transformation took hold. Now they held no reason, no recognition, only a bottomless hunger. It lunged for my throat, a hellish yowl ripping from its deformed mouth. I flung up my hands in an instinctive warding gesture, and felt something snap in my left forearm as the creature's jaws clamped down. Bone-deep agony blazed up my arm and I screamed, wrenched my hand free of that grisly trap of teeth with a wet pop and a gush of hot blood. The creature howled in savage triumph, worrying at my shredded flesh like a dog with a bone. I could feel the strength leaching out of me with each fresh spurting pulse from my tattered veins. So this was how it would end. Torn apart by a mockery of man, my body abandoned in this shadow-haunted pocket of primeval green. Just one more blood, offering to whatever impossible god had spawned these horrors. But some stubborn ember still smoldered in my core, some defiant scrap of self that refused to shuffle meekly into the abyss. Not like this, not alone and unmourned, fuel for a nightmare. With my good hand scrabbling in the leaf litter, I groped for anything solid. A rock, a root, a goddamn stick. My fingers closed on something hard, heavy. I didn't pause to look at it, just swung with every last scrap of my fading strength. The fist-sized river stone connected with the creature's temple with a sickening crack. It reeled back, that outsized maw falling slack in shock. I hit it again. Again. Bone crunched under stone and the creature toppled off me, mewling weakly. I lurched upright, swaying, the dripping stone still clenched in my nerveless fist. My vision swam gray at the edges, but I refused to let the encroaching dark claim me. If I fell now, I'd never get back up. The creature lay twitching on the forest floor, its misshapen skull a caved-in ruin. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream my defiance at the pitiless trees, but all that came out was a broken wheeze, because crashing toward me through the underbrush, heedless of obstacles, came another creature, and another, their guttural howls rising in a mad chorus that made my skin crawl. They had scented my blood, my weakness, and they were coming to feast on both. I ran. What else could I do? Crashing through the underbrush with the last reserves of my flagging strength, ducking under moss-furred branches and leaping rotting logs with an agility born of pure desperate adrenaline. The creatures bayed behind me, hot on my trail. So close I swore I could feel their carrion breath on the back of my neck, but I was losing blood, and fast. It pattered onto the loam from my savaged arm in fat, glistening drops, every heartbeat driving me closer to a final fall. The forest tilted around me and I staggered, slamming my shoulder against the rough bark of a towering spruce. This was it. I was finished, bled white and spent. The creatures would be on me in moments, and this grim chase would end in a welter of torn flesh and splintered bone. I squeezed my eyes shut, sending up a silent prayer to my ancestors for strength, for courage in this last extremity. The crashing grew louder, the howls more fever-pitched. I sucked in a shuddering breath and braced for the first rending bite, but it never came. Instead, the forest erupted with the staccato blast of gunfire, deafeningly close. My eyes flew open. Men in khaki uniforms charged past me, pushing through the grasping underbrush in an ordered line, rifles up and barking. Search and rescue. They had come at last. A wordless sob of relief tore out of me. They couldn't hear it over the din of their own weapons and the agonized shrieks of the monsters as slugs found flesh. But I didn't care. I wasn't alone. I wasn't forgotten. However this ended, I wouldn't be just another ghostly statistic, another shattered skeleton moldering under the ancient trees. A dark shape hurtled from the shadows behind the firing line, and one of the SAR men went down with a truncated scream, blood gouting. The creature that had felled him, a twisted thing with blackened stumps of antler erupting from its skull, crouched atop his chest and buried its snout in his belly with savage glee. The men fell back, trying to regroup, but the monsters were everywhere now, swarming from the shadows, seemingly impervious to pain or fear as they threw themselves on the barrels of the guns. More screams as men fell, rent by wicked teeth and jagged claws, limbs ripped away in gory streamers, bellies unzipped to spill loops of purplish gut onto the moss. It was chaos, madness, a scene from the deepest pit of hell. I pushed off from my tree, staggering toward the battle, no longer sure if I meant to aid the SAR men or simply let the same red ruin claim me too. But before I could reach them, another shape burst from the shadows. Bigger than the leaping man-things, a shaggy black mountain of muscle and fury swatting one of the SAR men aside like a broken toy. It was the creature, the one that had gutted Jake, had looked into my eyes and seen some flicker of kinship, of recognition before. And now here it was again, wading into the fray with unstoppable primal savagery. Only it wasn't attacking the SAR team, it was attacking the other monsters. With a bellow that shook the very trees, the great beast seized one of the leaping horrors and bashed its head against a boulder until it went limp, leaking clotted brain matter. Another leapt on the creature's back, sinking its fangs into one massive shoulder, only to be reached up and crushed, ribs popping like twigs in that unforgiving grip. I could only watch in stunned disbelief as the tide of battle turned, the creature scattering the pack of shrieking man-things before it like wind-tossed leaves. In moments, the smaller beasts were fleeing, yelping, into the darkening trees, leaving me alone with the impossible bulk of my unlikely savior. The creature turned to face me, its fathomless black eyes glittering in the fading light. Fresh blood ran in rivulets through its matted fur, but I couldn't tell how much came from its own wounds. It snorted, a guttural sound somewhere between challenge and recognition, and took one lumbering step toward me. I held my ground, though my whole body screamed to flee, transfixed by that penetrating gaze. It was the same look it had given me before, when it had stayed its killing stroke. I could have sworn something like profound, terrible intelligence flickered in those ebon depths. The creature huffed out a breath that stirred the fine hairs on my arms and bent, reaching for me with one black-nailed paw the size of a dinner plate. I flinched, but held, waiting on an impossible razor's edge between resignation and revelation. But before that heavy hand could close on my savaged arm, a rifle barked, so close it left my ears ringing. The creature roared as a bloody furrow appeared across its barreled chest, whirling to face the new threat with teeth bared. The last SR man still standing swayed on his feet, one arm hanging limp and useless at his side, his rifle wavering in his offhand, but his eyes were hard and steady as he stared down the monster that had saved him. "Get away from her," he gritted out from between clenched teeth. Blood ran into his eyes from a gash on his forehead, but he didn't blink, just tightened his finger on the trigger. "No!" I shouted, but too late. The rifle boomed again, and a wet red hole appeared in the creature's abdomen, releasing a gush of dark arterial flow. The beast screamed, more enraged than hurt, and charged the SR man on its short-bowed legs with terrifying speed. The man got off one more shot, going wide, before the creature was on him, ripping the gun from his hands like a child's toy and seizing him around the throat, lifting him off his feet as if he weighed nothing at all. I lurched forward, not even knowing what I intended. To help the man, to somehow stop the creature, to do anything but stand there and watch another human being shredded before my eyes. But the creature paused, the man kicking and choking in its grip. Slowly, so slowly, it turned its massive head to look at me, and I could have sworn I saw a flicker of something perilously close to sadness in its eyes. Then it squeezed, and the SAR man's neck popped like a dry twig. It hurled the twitching corpse away into the trees with terrible force and swung back to face me, blood-smeared jowls quivering. I met that fathomless gaze, helpless to look away. Tears streamed down my face, but I barely felt them through the leaden numbness settling into my limbs. "Why?" I croaked, barely audible. It was a child's question, plaintive, uncomprehending in the face of such carnage. The creature huffed, a low rumble I felt in my bones, and to my shock I understood. Not in words, but meaning imparted in a primal flash of electric connection like a lighting strike linking two ancient alien poles. This was not malice, not evil as I conceived it. This was nature, red in tooth and claw. The creature killed as a cougar killed the deer, as the eagle killed the hare, from need and instinct, and, I saw in that searing moment, to protect its own. The little monsters, twisted and cruel though they'd become, were the creature's get, its children after a fashion, transformed by some eldritch power, but still its blood, its kind, and the creature would fight to the death to preserve them, as any beast defends its young. Even from each other if it came to that. Even from me. I staggered back, reeling, as the creature swung away, dismissed. It loped into the gathering dark beneath the trees and was swallowed up, leaving me alone amid the corpses and the rising whine of insects, shaking, bleeding. I slid down the bole of a towering fir and buried my face in my knees. The night closed in around me as I huddled against the rough bark of the fir tree, too spent even to shiver. The metallic scent of blood, both mine and the creature's, hung thick in the air, an unholy incense. In the distance, the baying of the twisted pack faded, leaving only the sibilant whisper of wind through leaves and the muted, mournful calls of nightbirds. It was over. The immediate threat had passed, moved on to seek other prey. But the truth of what dwelt in these ancient woods could never be forgotten, never be unseen. I was changed, in some fundamental way, by the horrors I had witnessed, by the knowledge that mankind was not the undisputed master of these forests. Perhaps we never had been. Perhaps, as the native peoples had long known, we were merely guests in this place, tolerated only as long as we trod lightly and made the proper obeisances to forces beyond our ken, forces embodied by the great shaggy beast god that had saved me even as it tore men apart with its impossible strength. I didn't pretend to understand what I had seen in that last moment of connection, when the creature's fathomless eyes had met mine and some spark of meaning had passed between us, a glimpse of an primordial order, savage and unforgiving, of the timeless cycle of fang and blood and rebirth, uncaring of the follies of men. It was a truth too vast, too inhuman to compass. Not in my current wrecked state, barely clinging to consciousness as I slowly bled out my life force onto the uncaring forest floor. Dimly, As if from a great distance I heard voices calling my name. Human voices, high and panicked. The crackle of radios and the thump of booted feet pounding down the trail. More rangers, more rescuers, drawn by my last garbled transmission and the sudden silence that had followed. I tried to call out, to cry for aid, but my throat was raw and swollen. All that emerged was a weak croak, but it was enough. The bobbing beams of flashlights swung in my direction, fixing on my pale, blood-streaked face. Exclamations of shock and dismay, the clatter of a litter being unslung. Gentle hands were on me then, urgently triaging my wounds, pushing needles into veins to replace lost fluids. I was aware of being lifted, the swaying sensation of being carried between two tall figures. The canopy slid by overhead and I had the sudden inane urge to laugh. I was just one more damaged thing being dragged out of this forest, no different than a wounded deer or a mauled hiker. No, that wasn't true. I was different now. Transformed by dark wisdom, baptized in blood and pain and the awareness of mankind's terrifying fragility. The forest had worked its alchemy on me, remaking me into something wilder, more elemental, a creature myself in some ways. I had entered these woods one man, naive and cocksure. I would leave them another, if I left them at all. Darkness pressed in, narrowing my vision to a dim tunnel as shock finally pulled me down into its smothering embrace. The last thing I saw before unconsciousness claimed me was a pair of glittering ebony eyes, watching unblinking from the shadows between the trees, waiting, eternally patient, for the next poor mortal soul to stumble into its domain, never knowing the true nature of the hungry forest until it was far, far too late.